a very good morning to you just after 6 o'clock on Saturday, February the 15th. I'm David Bull. Hope you're very well wherever you are waking up across this great country and indeed around the world. Now, don't fear, great news for you this morning. It's Support an Independent Pub Day. Now, this is a really important initiative. It's to support local establishments in your area. So, a word from me, please do pop into your local pub and show that you care.
Probably the best pub in the world.
Also today, by the way, it's Singles Awareness Day. It's also known as Singles Appreciation Day. It happens every single year after Valentine's Day and celebrates love of those who are World Hippo Day, a day that raises awareness of the third largest mammal on Earth. Now, hippos are native of sub-Saharan Africa. They can weigh up to 2,000 kilos. I know that feeling all too well. Hippo Day. Right, let's start today's show, shall we?
Today's fascinating facts.
So for this hour, today's fascinating facts. On this day in 1849, the birth of Sir Richmond John Godley. He was an English surgeon. In 1884, at the Epileptic Hospital in Regent's Park, he became one of the first to surgically remove a tumour of the brain in 1849. On this day in 1901, Winston Churchill entered Parliament for the first time as MP for Oldham. MPs of this period were actually unpaid, and Churchill was forced to take a speaking tour in order to fund his tenure. And on this day in 1928, after some 70 years of work, the first edition of the Oxford English Dictionary was completed. And those are today's fascinating facts.
Weekend mornings we're taking flight. With David Bull, everything feels right. Weekend breakfast, shining like the sun.
Good morning, 4 minutes past 6 on Saturday, February the 15th. Just singing along to myself. Actually, not just to myself, because I'm joined this morning by Georgie Frost, the Times Money Mentors editor at large. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fab.
You look really well.
Thank you.
Yeah, you do. You look great. Shall we talk about pubs? This is something that is very, very dear to my heart. And I looked back yesterday at the numbers of pubs closing. And I think we lose these at our peril. I was just looking back in 2024. More than one pub a day closed. And obviously the pubs, they're really struggling, aren't they? Just in terms of the cost of staff. And then you've got the employer's national insurance coming in. You've got the utility bills. Also in terms of overheads generally. I don't know how these small pubs can survive.
It's been a terrible time, and I wouldn't just say, I mean, COVID was horrendous, obviously, for pubs, but this has been going on. I think you could probably trace this back almost to the smoking ban. Things have really changed for pubs, I think. You know, firstly, it's taxation, as you rightly mentioned, and then coming down the line, we have this national insurance rise, which maybe, if you're a landlord, would be looking at this, just think head in hands moment. There's loads of different reasons why pubs are shutting. Look, every time I go to the pub now, I'm thinking £7 for a pint.
Absolutely.
How much for a fish and chips? £18.
Or gin and tonic. Yeah.
It's ridiculous. They're huge.
£18 for fish and chips. You're right. Yeah.
Huge costs, and for a variety of different reasons. Why this, I think, is particularly worrying, and some people will argue, you know, it's changing consumer habits. We're not drinking as much. The younger generation isn't. This isn't about drinking so much.
No.
This is about it being a place where you can go to meet friends, to have a community spirit. They're vitally important. And we've had so much research now that says that, you know, one of the biggest killers is not so much things like obesity, is going to be loneliness.
100%.
And if there was a replacement of things like community centres, but we're not getting that.
We're not. And just in terms of the numbers, just to put some facts onto this, we are seeing just huge numbers of pubs. 2,000 pubs have disappeared since 2019. There are only 39,000 left in England and Wales. And according to this new survey from the British Institute of Innkeepers, housekeeping, 25% of pubs will close in 2025. Now, the reason, and you've touched on something really important, I'm involved in trying to keep my local pub open, which it is not open, but we've now got a hearing which is coming up, and we have I need to be careful what I say here, but there are, let me just broaden this.
Yes.
Let me broaden it. There are people who are speculating by buying pubs as a going concern, saying they're not actually viable, closing them down and trying to convert them into houses. Now, if you live in a village, as I do, the pub is an integral part of that because it is the lifeblood of that village. And as you say, it is the only time when families get together where you meet older people, younger people, you all come together, and there is a commonality, a sense of purpose. That is all gone, and people are now living in these silos, and there is nowhere to go.
Yeah, near where I live, it's a very similar situation. We had, actually, it was an old restaurant, but it would have been perfect as a pub, or what we've been wanting and people have been calling for is it to be turned into a community centre. Wouldn't that be marvellous?
Yeah.
A big fast food chain is coming along, so it's basically going to turn our town into a motorway service station, effectively, you know, and I think it's a real shame because, you know, that could have been a space that could have been wonderful for our area, and it's just going to be used for something that's...
What do you think the answer is? Because I've been wondering, you know, is there a way, and certainly in COVID, that pub opened a shop, for example, and that was brilliant because particularly older people could get eggs and bread and milk and all the rest of it. But again, that isn't enough money to offset what the government is about to do.
I mean, what to do? I mean, I've said it before, I don't agree with the national insurance rise for employers. I think that's going to be absolutely horrendous for the service sector. For anyone that employs a lot of staff, and this is one area, I think business rates absolutely need to be looked at because it is unfair. If you've got one of the big problems is how cheap alcohol is in supermarkets, you know, and COVID did sort of encourage us to stay inside. So we aren't seeing the benefit of spending £7 or whatever it is on a pint, or £5 on a pint, when you can just buy it so much cheaper.
I'd like to go wherever it is £5
on a pint, but it is, you know, it's so much cheaper in supermarkets, and yet they don't have to pay in the same way that pubs do. But I think you know, the whole industry needs to be looked at. But also we have a responsibility. I hear so often, and this is the same thing with, you know, libraries and stuff. We don't want them to go, but we don't use them. Banks is another great example. And I'm not saying you should just make up a reason to go to a bank, right? But, you know, you should appreciate that actually these are services that perhaps need to be protected. And look, I'm not massively into government intervention in certain areas. However, I do think there are services which are fundamental for people. You know, for things like supermarkets, I think are fundamental. I think, you know, community centres / pubs, maybe pubs you could argue for the alcohol, but look, I think maybe, you know, the local councils need to sort of take a look at what can be done to preserve these sorts of spaces. But we have a responsibility, as you rightly said there. Go support your local pub.
Yes.
If you don't use it, you will lose it.
Correct. Well said, well said. Should we talk about, if you are just waking up this morning, these are extraordinary headlines. I saw this speech by J.D. Vance yesterday, and my mouth dropped open. In fact, there was someone this morning who said, I'm absolutely furious at what J.D. Vance said. I'm furious because it took an American politician to say something that no one is brave enough to say in the UK. Let me just show you these headlines this morning. Daily Telegraph, Vance, free speech in Britain is in retreat. The Times, Vance tells Europe to clean up its own mess. The Guardian, Vance launches blistering attack on Europe's leaders. Let me just tell you what he said. Just wait for this. J.D. Vance has warned Britain that mass migration and the erosion of free speech pose a greater threat than Russia. Just take that on board for a moment. This is at the Munich Security Conference, and of course he was there to talk about Ukraine, as far as I could see, and what the end point was going to be, what the solution for Ukraine is. But no, he laid into Britain in particular, saying free speech was in retreat and Brexit voters had been betrayed by elites, opening the floodgates to millions of unvetted migrants. He is right. And he went further. He told world leaders, the threat I worry about the most vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China or any other external actor. What I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat from Europe on some of its most fundamental values, values shared by the United States of America. Cue this sort of tumbleweed going past. I think the European leaders just didn't quite know what to do with themselves.
Excuse the expression, but the speech went down like a cup of cold
yes.
I would suggest. In Europe, I mean, I suppose it's pick your audience. If you're there in Munich at a security conference,
or
telling
was it
Europeans...
just priceless?
My view is it was more for an American audience. I do think it was played. I do think, and then I think some of the jokes, particularly that went, I mean, it was tumbleweed, were, you know, one about Greta Thunberg, you know, how the Americans have had to deal with her for 10 years. Europe should suck up Elon Musk for 3 months. I find this really, really interesting. One, I think it's a microcosm of things are different now. You know, it was a speech that says you were expecting us to come here to play by the rules, to, you know, press palms and, you know, thank our hosts and talk about Ukraine, which was on everybody's thoughts. Some people have called it a weird speech. Some people have said it was unhinged. But it was setting their own agenda. And I think we have to get used to that. Whether you like Trump or Vance or this new regime is not almost neither here nor there. What they've done is held up a mirror to Europe and said, before you start, you know, having a go and lording it over everybody else, take a look at what you're doing yourself. And it is not lost that it was a speech given in a city that I believe the day before, was it? Yeah. Someone ploughed into people in a street, and it's becoming actually sadly quite a common occurrence across Europe. Now, I have complained about the Trump regime for all of this talk about tariffs and, you know, taking over Greenland or whatever they want to do, and having just spent quite a lot of time in America, there are a huge number of problems that America need to look at within their own borders, right? And I think that they should be doing that. But I think equally Europe need to do the same thing. It's like the lessons of Brexit were never learned.
Well, they weren't.
And they weren't learned because what happens, and you saw it with the speeches that were given afterwards, is immediately people go, he's wrong, he's talking rubbish, how dare he come here into our backyard and tell us a few home truths. But that's the reality, there are a few home truths. And it is what people across Europe are thinking and is being borne out in the polls. And it's very interesting. He name-checked, and this is in the Times, I believe, today, an article, or a Telegraph, with Adam Smith Connor. I don't know if you remember him, but back in October, he was convicted for praying silently outside an abortion clinic in November 2022. He was within a zone and he had to pay £9,000 for breaching a ban on protest. He was silently praying. And I think it's an example, and don't get me wrong, I think there's an element of theobros, they're calling it, the spread of Christianity and protection of Christianity in America. And we know that this Vance is particularly, having been a converted Catholic, is very keen on pushing. But there are too many cases of this where the public in the UK and across Europe are deeply concerned.
Yes, I would agree.
And what they should do is, rather than go, Vance is crazy, Trump is crazy, is go, actually, was the old way of working? The tariffs is a really good example, just ever so briefly, because what it forces us to do, and I don't agree with it, and I actually don't think it's legal according to World Trade Organization rules to single out certain countries. However, I do think we need to look at where our products are coming from.
I would agree.
You know, can we buy British? Can we, you know... And I think the old world order, Europe has relied for too many years, decades in fact, on Americans coming in and saving the financial day when it comes to war. We wrote too many checks with Ukraine, and this is talking about Ukraine, expanding out because that's on the front covers a lot of papers, is we made promises that we couldn't really keep because American funding has been backing us up. 100%. And it's about time that we took a look and actually, can we protect ourselves? How is it that Russia, with an economy smaller than Italy, we as an entire Europe couldn't stand up to Russia?
Whoa, there are so many parts to this conversation. No, there are so many parts to this conversation.
I've taken so many front covers there.
Well, you have really, and I do want to break all of that down bit by bit if we can. But let's just go back, if I may, just to the whole kind of overview, because essentially he is siding with the masses who believe exactly what he believes in. You've opened the floodgates to immigration. You're not listening to the populace. You have allowed the countries to lose their democratic right. You haven't actually capitalised on Brexit. So we've got all of that going on. Now, when you look at that, he's taking the people versus the European elites, and they don't like it at all. Downing Street declined to comment, but there was a government source who said this is pretty simplistic. It's a simplistic read of a complex set of problems. We don't sit here overjoyed to hear it. No, I bet you don't like hearing it. Also, J.D. Vance then talked about the AfD, and of course there's been a lot of talk. So the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, which is a right-wing party in Germany, looks like it's going to do very well over in Germany. And of course, they're wading into European politics. So something very interesting is going on here. The Lib Dems also not very very keen on this. Britain will not take lectures about political freedoms from the acolyte of a president who tried to undermine American democracy and now praises Putin. You're not reading the room.
How useful. Comments like that just really aren't useful.
Helpful. No, they're not.
At all. At all. And it's also a bit... I don't know. I just don't think, not reading the room, you're not self-reflecting, which I think is what we actually need to do. And what actually I think Britain is very good at is a bit of navel-gazing, a bit of actually, can we look and think, and why people are... And this is my problem, right, with, and can you call it the left, I suppose, is... when people go to the polls and they vote, and actually Vance in his speech did cite Brexit as an example where the democratic process worked, where people were unhappy. Now, whether you agree with it or not, the point is that people were unhappy and they voted to do something about it.
Correct.
And they are doing that across Europe. And actually, it wasn't... not everyone in Europe wasn't very happy. I think in Rome they were quite happy. Giorgia Meloni was OK with the speech.
Funny that.
I think funny that, exactly, right? So there were sort of segments that were OK with the speech, but I just think he is right in the fact that for too long people have been shut down for having legitimate concerns over freedom of speech, over migration, over all of these issues, which if you had engaged people and been honest with them and not put people down as being racist or whatever name you want to call people, then we might be in a very different situation. But we are still doing it. And it's not just the speech, it's the repercussions from the speech, it's the comments that people said afterwards that show lessons haven't been learned and we haven't listened to the speech at all.
No. And there's true indignation from across Europe, not from Italy, as you rightly say. Boris Pistorius, the German defence minister, sets aside the speech he had prepared. He then had a whole different speech that he actually issued as a rebuttal to J.D. Vance. He says our democracy across all of Europe was questioned by the US vice president just now. He speaks of annulment of democracy, and if I understood him correctly, he likens the conditions in parts of Europe to those in authoritarian regimes. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not acceptable. Instead of actually saying, you've raised some very interesting points, it's something that we need to reflect on. Again, it's just this pushback the whole time. But I think that J.D. Vance has summed up the mood of the nation.
Look, let me be clear. I think he sums up parts of it. It was a very popular speech, and there's certainly parts of it I don't agree with. And there is a discomfort, of course there is, of who are you to come here and tell us what to do? And the sad reality of this, and this is why I mentioned Ukraine, is, well, they're the money men. I'm sorry, for too
100%.
long,
Well, they
Europe have relied on the money.
Well, let's talk about NATO. So again, he has said, look, it's not acceptable. You've relied on the United States for far too long. We are the major player in NATO. You are not paying enough of your GDP, percentage of GDP, and it is not acceptable. Now, if you want to play, you pay. And he's right.
And the sad reality is UK actually have done very well in paying what they're supposed to, and they've committed to paying, whereas there are certainly other countries across Europe that haven't done so.
Not at all.
Germany, France, Italy, to name a few, billions of pounds that haven't been paid that should have been paid into. But look, you can understand from America's point of view here. You know, global sands are shifting. Why, you know, if you're America, you'd be thinking, hang on a minute, if my biggest threat is China, why would I be throwing so many resources into a European conflict, which Trump is like, sort it out yourself? You know, look, I just...
And of course, no US boots on the soil to keep the peace, he said.
This is the thing. And actually, whether you like the methods or not, and I leave that gap there for you to decide.
No, that's fine.
We have, to a degree, got some sort of deal going on in the Middle East. We have, to a degree, got the cogs of a deal. I mean, he is the deal man.
He is the
happening
deal man.
in Ukraine. The question I would ask, and look, you know, it's hard. I support Ukraine. I don't agree with a country invading another country. I think it's absolutely awful. But how many more people have to die for this war? We
I understand that.
We need to come to some sort of... We have made commitments across Europe to Ukraine, that yes, we will support you, but support to a certain extent. And Ukraine have done incredibly well to get this far, you know. But this is not a war they can win. Now, I'm not saying just hand over loads of parts of their country. They can't win it.
But they think they can win. And
certainly without US support, and I think listening to Volodymyr Zelensky, who actually has responded quite well to all the speculation about Russia and Putin and Trump meeting together, with actually, I welcome these sorts of discussions. And, you know, and it's sort of with dignity. And I think that we do need to find a solution to this, because this is a war without direct boots properly on the ground, NATO standing up and the whole of Europe coming together. I just don't see where this is going to end, except in more bloodshed for innocent, you know, Ukrainians and Russians.
And there's so much more we need to talk about. Let me just ask you, if I may, what do you think of J.D. Vance's speech? Do you think his comments were correct? Were they appropriate, actually, to be given at that conference? Also, what do you make of the fact that European leaders not best pleased by what J.D. Vance has said? Let me know, please. 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also message us on X at talkTV. Of course, we need to talk after the break also about the difference between what Pete Hegseth is saying and also what Keir Starmer is saying. Of course, Starmer is now saying, well, Ukraine is on an irreversible path into joining NATO. Meanwhile, Pete Hegseth says there's no way they're going to join NATO. We need to talk about all of that. We've got so much more to talk about as well coming up after the break. I want to talk about Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband says, no, we're not going to have fracking in this country, even though it means cheaper energy bills, despite finding massive amounts of gas in British territorial waters. We'll talk about that next after this break. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
What to me it does betray, though, is just a lack of intelligence. You know, you said to me, am I in big WhatsApp groups? I get added to them, and the first thing I do is silence them and stick them in archive, or just sort of after a while just go exit. I never contribute to them because I know better than that, because I've got a brain. It doesn't really betray a whole lot of nous or intelligence from people who want to serve in politics.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, this is Talk. I'm talking about these headlines with Georgie Frost, the Daily Telegraph. Vance, free speech in Britain is in retreat. I would agree, the Times this morning. Vance tells Europe to clean up its own mess, of course, saying the US is not going to be responsible for policy across Europe. The Guardian, Vance launches blistering attack on Europe's leaders, which went down, what did you say, like a cup of cold something or other. Yes. Also, the front page of the Daily Mail this morning, free speech is in retreat in the UK, warns Trump's VP. It's everywhere this morning. Lots of messages coming in. Gemma Atkinson, good morning to you. Georgie Frost, you look amazing today, I told you.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Love your jumper. You look like you're about to pick up a cricket bat.
Play cricket, yeah.
Well, maybe you are. Maybe you are.
I do enjoy cricket.
Do you?
No, very much so.
Well, there we are.
Yeah.
I used to like scoring. I found it very mathematical, and you could put dots everywhere on the sheet.
Oh, there is. It does have that appeal.
Yes.
Have you ever got a Wisden book?
No, can't say I have.
Never mind. Every year there goes a Wisden book. It's all the stats. So if you're a real stato.
Yes.
My brother reads them from... it's a step too far for me. I just like watching the game.
It is a step too far. So this morning I'm asking, what do you think of J.D. Vance's speech? I think many people had their jaws falling open when they heard that speech. Of course, he was there officially to talk about Ukraine and an end to the conflict there and what the US's policy was going to be. And of course, he laid into Europe, he laid into Britain, saying, hang on a minute, you have abolished free speech, also far too much immigration, you have betrayed Brexit. Your thoughts, please, on his comments on all of the above. 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged at the national rate. So many of you getting in touch already. Sharon Miller, good morning to you. Well done, J.D. Vance. What a fantastic speech. Dimitri, good morning to you. Never a truer word spoken, but no one will listen. They will bury their heads in the sand, all to protect the falling euro, the crime that is multiculturalism, and their own egos. Never admit to mistakes. As I said, Boris Pistorius saying he's very unhappy about. What did you say? It was totally unacceptable, the speech. Fantastic from J.D. Vance, David. Great to see all the European leaders' faces when hearing the truth. More of the same, please. Mark in Southampton. Keep all of those messages coming. Shall we talk about energy? Because
why not?
Actually, it is so pressing, I think, for so many people. Just the rise in the electricity bills, the energy bills in this country. We've heard about pensioners who can't keep warm, who are sitting there in front of a one-bar electric fire. I think the whole thing is utterly disgraceful. Meanwhile, you've got these elites, these metropolitan elites who are obsessed with net zero, which, by the way, no one actually voted for, but that's beside the point. Ed Miliband comes into play here again. So they've discovered this enormous gas field off the coast of the UK. Ed Miliband, instead of embracing this and saying this is going to be part of our journey towards net zero, which I think many people could get behind, Ed Miliband, no, he says, I'm going to pledge a permanent ban on fracking. This is days after the discovery of the giant gas field was announced. He said he will not change course on the Labour manifesto to ban fracking for good, despite discovery of the field under Lincolnshire that, by the way, would give us enough fuel for a decade. Experts say the gas is essential bridging fuel needing to wean Britain off oil as it electrifies transport and heating and expands renewables. But at the moment, this is the bit that they don't seem to understand is we are importing gas. They don't tell you that, do they?
No. I mean, this is... So the issue with this, they discovered this field under Lincolnshire. So it's not an offshore, and under Lincolnshire is quite important because fracking involves basically drilling really deep into the earth.
Yeah.
You pump at really high pressure, water, chemicals, sand, all that thing. It basically breaks up the rock there, releases the oil and gas into these wells, and they suck it up. Now, it's been linked to minor tremors and earthquakes.
Minor tremors.
And this is the point, right? So they're saying, you know, Mr. Miliband has argued that the ban on fracking should stay in place because of the risk of earth tremors, which they first discovered 2011. And the argument with, for example, America, which is very big on fracking, and that's one of the reasons why it's got such energy security, is because it's a big country and it doesn't really matter, right?
Right.
However, as you rightly pointed out, they are incredibly minor. Experts are arguing this gas is essential to bridging the fuel that's needed to wean us off oil. as we electrify transport and heating to hit the net zero targets. We have got to get to that point. It allows us to invest and to have that extra time to invest in decent, sustainable technology that can get Ed Miliband wherever he wants to go. But this mad rush and this almost blind view of we have to do this now, means that we are doing things like having to import or risking having to import in the future, which leaves us vulnerable to energy security measures. It leaves us vulnerable to increasing even more climate emissions because we have to transport this stuff over.
But they don't tell you that bit.
And it makes no sense. Look, again, I keep arguing this. It doesn't really matter if you agree with climate change or not. The reality is this stuff is not going to be around forever. So we have to think and find ways of sustainably supplying us for energy into the future. But until we get to that stage, we need energy now. We need oil and gas now. Otherwise, we leave ourselves in an incredibly vulnerable situation because there are countries like America, countries like China that are going to continue as they were. And where do we sit on the table of trying to influence them in the future? We don't. If we impoverish ourselves so badly now, we have absolutely no say over the direction of energy in the future.
Let me just tell you right now, and I'm looking at National Grid Live, this is how much gas we are using. 57% of our energy currently is coming from gas. Now, when you look at the UK, we consume 75 billion cubic metres of natural gas a year. It's used to generate a third of the UK's electricity. 25 million homes rely on it to power the gas boilers providing the heat and hot water. As you say, we now import 30 billion cubic metres of gas from Norway, 15 billion arriving as LNG from the US and Qatar. Ed Miliband's response, la 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 la, doesn't want to know.
Exactly, and this is why I don't understand. It's sort of joined up thinking. We're sort of offshoring almost our
100%. It's not a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If it's dealt with somewhere else, then it's fine. It's just what happens here. No, if you genuinely believe in this, then you have to look at this holistically. You have to look at the bigger picture, the law of unintended consequences. What will happen if we impoverish ourselves, for example? Will we have the ability to do all the things that we want to do to reach climate, net zero and beyond, to have a sustainable future on this planet? If you are doing these measures now, it just seems to me so bloody minded, sticking your fingers in your ear and just, this is the direction we're going. And I think it's a shame.
Well, I actually think it's not very astute politically, because if he said, look, this is great news, we've found all of this gas, it will help us in the transition, we can keep bills lower whilst we move to renewables, I think you could take the public with you. But at the moment you're saying, no, you just have to put up with huge bills. Yeah, no, exactly. And we've already seen over the last few years just how damaging any disruption to energy supply can be. We've seen bills have to get to a point where the government imposed a cap at, what was it, £2,500 a year on average. And bear in mind, this is an average. Whenever I talk about energy cap, it is an average of, two-bedroom house, etc. Some people who've got going up again, isn't it?
It is going up again in April, and that's why they're expecting inflation to rise as a result of increased energy bills. It is never ending. It feels like to people bills are going up, and you look at measures like this and you think, I can just see it going up even further.
Thank you for the moment, Georgie. After the break, I want to talk about some other big stories. There's a story here in the Telegraph this morning. Zimbabwean paedophile is allowed to stay in the UK, wait for this, because he would face hostility back home. Make of that what you will. Boris Johnson is planning a sensational political comeback, apparently, to see off the threat of reform. And if things weren't bad enough, the NHS is hiring diversity staff on double the salary of junior doctors. What is going on? This is Weekend Breakfast.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
6:38, Saturday, February the 15th. I'm joined by the gorgeous Georgie Frost, who's playing cricket. Lots of you getting in touch. I'm asking this morning, what did you think of J.D. Vance's speech? I thought it was rather good, actually. He's right. He's basically saying you betrayed Brexit, you've allowed too many people into the country, free speech is under threat. All the political elites are thinking, hang on a minute, you can't say that. You've got all of the leaders from across Europe absolutely apoplectic about what is going on. I say, well said, J.D. Vance. As I said earlier on this morning, someone said I'm furious with J.D. Vance's speech because it took an American politician to say something that a British politician should have said a long time ago. Andy Yates, good morning to you. Andy in Notts. Good morning, David and Georgie. Not only did I love J.D. Vance's speech, I found myself clapping where the audience was supposed to. The cat thought I'd lost it completely. Tim Kirk, good morning to you. Vance is spot on. We all know it, and judging by the Euro numpties' angry reactions to it, so do they. That's Tim in Pompeii. Oi, oi. He says this morning, good morning to you. Fantastic. Mark in Southampton, fantastic speech from J.D. Vance, David. Great to see all of the European leaders' faces when hearing the truth. More of the same, please. Keep of those, all of those coming in. Ooh, this is nice. Shelley Lister, good morning to you. That's just popped in to my inbox. A ray of sunshine every time you have gorgeous Georgie on the programme.
Oh,
that's nice, isn't it? Comments from Vance. Yes, free speech and common sense is muted and ignored in the UK. But with the Three Stooges in charge, why the surprise? Anyone got Eddie Redmayne's telephone number? Regards Ian in the City of Culture. Keep all of your messages coming in, please. Let's talk about this, shall we? Because he mentions immigration. This is a story this morning that is going to make you absolutely livid. A convicted Zimbabwean paedophile was allowed to stay in Britain because he would face hostility if he was deported to his home country. An immigration tribunal judge blocked his deportation to Zimbabwe by the Home Office because it would breach, wait for it, altogether, his Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which prohibits torture, inhuman treatment and degrading punishment. The judge accepted the lawyer's claims that as an openly gay man who had been jailed for more than 5 years for child sex offences, he was likely to face substantial hostility from the Zimbabwean authority. I'm sorry, not our problem. Bye, out, deport. Oh, you're going to be weak on me, Georgie.
no, not at all.
Oh.
Not at all.
Come on, then.
Look, to live in a society, you make a commitment to that society. Almost, we do. Otherwise, we would all descend into anarchy. There has to be some sort of... And to go so unbelievably... I mean, there's no way I can defend a paedophile. Sorry,
No.
Dr. David, I just can't do it. But, I just, these stories like this, and there are getting to be too many.
Aren't there just?
And this is the reason why people are really against it. And the reason I'm pausing and I'm being a bit frustrated by this is because there are genuinely legitimate claims for people to come to this country to flee persecution, right?
Yes.
Genuinely legitimate claims, and we should be doing what we can to help those people. But it's stories like this that are turning the public against it, and this is where we need, and the government, and this is where I go back to this freedom of speech, need to allow this debate to happen. We need to be discussing this in an open way and saying, this is not acceptable. Absolutely
100%.
not acceptable.
But you see,
the
government just clamps down very hard on those people who are voicing their concerns. And of course, the Telegraph is actually doing a very good job on all of these stories. So if you remember, there was this Albanian migrant not deported because his son wouldn't eat foreign chicken McNuggets. Let's just leave that there. A Pakistani paedophile father not deported. This was the ECHR Article 8, right to family life. A woman granted asylum after joining a prescribed terrorist group. She tried and failed to get asylum 8 times, and the only way she could do was to actually join a prescribed terrorist group in Nigeria, and therefore the judge ruled she had a fear of persecution under human rights laws. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up.
The judges are not supposed to make the laws. The laws are supposed to be made...
They're meant to interpret the law.
They're supposed to interpret quite. So this, again, falls back to the government. The judges, and look, as much as some of the decisions I find a bit strange, and I don't agree with them, they will be basing it, and I do believe they're doing it without fear or favour. They're doing it as an interpretation of what the laws of the land are.
But
so
maybe
again,
the interpretation is too loose.
Perhaps it is. Then the government need to step in and make sure that those loopholes are closed. It is the government's responsibility to make sure that these sorts of things don't happen. I go back to the thing, if you come to this country, we will help you, right? This is how we should do it. We will help you, and we go with, you know, an open heart and an open mind, but things like this, once you break that code, that social contract with us, you are out.
Yes,
I'm sorry, you are out. You know when the problems that you will face back home, so then you would think you would tread extra carefully, but this is just,
I think you're right, and also, actually, the word I would use is you have a contract with the state, that
Yeah,
you are
social
allowed
contract.
you're allowed the freedoms of this great country, but you abide by the rules of that country.
I agree.
And if you don't, you're out.
I agree, and this is, I think, which goes back to some of the arguments around, you know, people coming into the country that don't have views about women that we would share, who don't have views about the LGBTQ community. Again, if you don't like our views and that attitude, and you are going to act on them, don't get me wrong, in the privacy of your own home, you can have what views you like. Right? Absolutely, I don't mind that. That's fine. But if you are going to act on those, if you are going to, you know, commit terrorist acts or anything like this, you know, Zimbabwean paedophile story, I'm sorry, then you're not welcome. We cannot keep accepting this as that view to a lot of people. That view I've just said will be viewed as potentially racist for saying that. But no, that's not the case. Like I say, I absolutely, with an open heart and an open mind, welcome people to come here who legitimately have claims. This is a wonderful country, and I want people to enjoy it. God, there's certainly people here that I think you're going to go somewhere else. But if you do not think that women deserve a place in society, that people who are gay deserve a place in society, if you will murder, commit paedophilia, if you will deal in drugs and those sorts of things, you are not welcome, and that is okay to say. Sorry.
I totally agree with you. Let's move on and talk about the political landscape. I wonder if I could bring you the latest poll, which I know that we've got. This is the latest poll, which is going to make very sobering reading indeed for the Conservative Party and for Labour. This is the Find Out Now poll, which came out yesterday, I think it was, showing, once again, Reform UK first on 29, Labour on 23, Conservatives on 21, Lib Dems on 12, and the Greens on 9. Now, that means that Reform UK has stayed static. Labour is down 2 points, Conservatives up 3 points, Lib Dems down -1. So the reason I show you that is because I think what it shows is the Conservatives are in trouble at this point of the electoral cycle. I have no doubts in my mind that I have never known such an unpopular government in the Labour Party, and yet the Conservatives aren't making headway. Now, the reason I tell you that is Boris Johnson is thinking about making a comeback. Yes, 5 of his allies have told The Telegraph. Friends of the former Prime Minister said they thought he was growing bored of life away from Westminster, with more than 2 years having passed since he left Number 10. Mr Johnson believes there is unfinished business and will be watching and waiting on British politics and the fate of the Conservative Party. What do you think?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Do you know, it was the great hope in Boris that I thought, and I'm no crazy fan of him, I have no opinion either way, but the one thing I thought, and I hoped, and I said at the time, I think he's going to do reasonably well. And I know, right, I know, right, I admit to that, but the reason I thought is because no one cares more about his ego and his legacy than Boris, and I thought he'd be doing everything he could to learn the craft of statesmanship and to be a great leader. I think, to be fair, he was, you know, any leader during COVID and that sort of situation was a very difficult position.
And of course he was very ill himself, and I think that skewed his decision-making.
Exactly. I think he started off in what now would appear to be perhaps a better way, you know, a bit more laissez-faire kind of way, and then he got COVID and then things changed. But be that as it may, going back to the Conservatives and the unpopularity, you know, watching Kemi Badenoch at Prime Minister's Questions the other day, I thought it was a terrible performance. Yeah. There is a and I don't dislike her or not. That's not. It's just that performance, and I think that where is she? And then I say, you know,
Actually, just stop there. Where is she?
but yes, exactly. No, but my point being is that actually we've seen this for too long now. The reason that the Labour got in, I hate to say it, it's not based on fantastically sparkling principles and personalities within the Labour Party. It's the country was really fed up with the Conservatives. The Labour Party did nothing. They didn't. They just had to sit there.
Well, they didn't have any policies,
the time, and now we're reaping whatever they've sown there by having no policies and no clear direction. But you are getting into the same thing with the Conservatives right now, and I think what people are looking at is, it seems to be that whether you agree with reform, I say this a lot, but it's true. They do seem to be a party that has some sort of a policy and principles and a direction for, you know, and look, I'm not a reform person at all. It wouldn't be a party that I would personally vote for. But again, if you can't understand why people would, you are part of the problem, because you need to stand up and start, you know. And the thing with Boris is, you know, he looks to be, I don't agree that he necessarily is, a man that does stand up, the man that can be quite statesman-like. The problem was he fell well short when he was put in the job the last time. So if he's thinking of coming back, I hope he's got a lot more plans than he does this time.
I also think he didn't listen to his gut over COVID. I think he was swayed by the so-called scientific advisors over what was going on. It's interesting that he is actually attending the Munich Security Conference, which I didn't know. He's also been in touch with Donald Trump on the telephone. He's in touch with Zelensky as well. He's clearly on manoeuvres.
Well, I think a lot of that is because a lot of his legacy and one thing that he could point to was his support for Ukraine.
I would agree with that.
And I think it would be in his best interest, personally, for his ego again, to support, you know, some kind of good resolution there for Ukraine, as he has been. So, I mean, there's an article that he wrote actually in, I think it was the Mail yesterday about this, and he doesn't see it as, you know, Trump and Putin squeezing Zelensky out of the deal, etc. But, you know, there is a most of what Boris does is probably for Boris.
Oh, well, I would agree with that. I mean, it's interesting, one of his former cabinet ministers saying it's unfinished business. His hero is Churchill. Churchill did it. He is still young enough to do it. He is younger than Theresa May when she was Prime Minister.
He's younger than Trump, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's very interesting indeed. So that brings me to another question for you this morning. Would you welcome Boris Johnson coming back? And if so, would you want him to be leader of the Conservative Party? Lots of questions for you this morning. 0344 499 1000. After the break, I'm going to be talking about the NHS. 200 billion quid we're spending roughly on the NHS. But wait for this. The NHS is still hiring diversity staff on double the salary of junior doctors. What are they thinking? Good morning.
They're all pulling back from DEI. But interestingly enough here, where there are those international firms, accountancy firms like Deloitte. Deloitte has pulled back in America, it's not here. The thing that's frightening about Britain at the moment is we're now an island. Europe is swinging to the right, America is swinging to the right, Australia is about to, Canada is about to, and we are increasingly on a limb and run. For heaven's sake, our foreign relations are in that safe and steady hands
but the people
of David Lammy.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk 6:54 now on Saturday, February the 15th. I'm joined by the lovely Georgie Frost. We're talking about J.D. Vance and his speech. It is pretty much front page of every single newspaper. This morning, some great home truths, I think, about Britain, about the European Union, have gone down like a cup of cold whatever, as Georgie said. Clearly not well received across Europe. Boris Pistorius from Germany said it was unacceptable, or words to that effect. He says in the Daily Telegraph, this is their front page, free speech in Britain is in retreat. This is the Times. Vance tells Europe to clean up its own mess. It is a blistering attack by any means from the Vice President. Good morning, Dr. Davis, says Rachel. Loving the show this morning. In answer to your question, I was also asking about Boris Johnson. Should he come back? I think he'd planned to come back all along. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this is another big story. NHS trusts, I just give up, are hiring I just give up. I just give up. They're hiring equality and diversity staff on twice the salary of a junior doctor. Hang on a minute, I didn't think we had any money, as the Health Secretary attacked misguided agendas. So let me just get this right. This is EDI, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. In fact, in the next hour, Georgie and I will be talking about JP Morgan, because the boss of JP Morgan, I'm on his side. This includes the NHS England EDI secondment position in covering southwest of England. Wait for this. Just to talk about equality, diversity and inclusion, 122,000 a year, I think I might apply. Head of EDI role in a London trust, the salary there, 91,000. Let's just juxtapose that, shall we, with a junior doctor who starts on 36,000. Now, which would you prefer, Georgie? Would you like someone to talk about EDI, or would you like to have a doctor?
I mean, this is, I think, a Trump effect. You know, or,
yes, may well be.
The fact that we're seeing D&I, what would we call them, policies being ditched at big companies, BT, Accenture, Amazon, and I think West Streeting is now looking at some of these things and saying, well, firstly, we need to get rid of this unbelievable waste. The trusts are overspending by 1.2 billion. But some of these measures, and as someone who works in press, and I love, don't get me wrong, you know, PR people are amazing and they provide us with lots of stories, but oftentimes, and this was particularly in sport, they justify their position. Right. You know, and I think what you do with ED&I is, look, most of this is common sense. You know, we have laws in place that do not discriminate against someone. Just don't be an idiot in the workplace, right? But I think a lot of these jobs, people are sort of justifying what their positions are. So here, just let me give you one example. Imperial College NHS Trust, EDI team, offers a 49-slide microaggressions toolkit. And bear in mind, this is to NHS staff. Many of them probably have a heck of a lot more important things to do, which tells staff that, quote, white people as a collective group have unearned advantages over other races or ethnicity groups. Microaggressions are one of the most common forms of discrimination in the workplace. What are microaggressions, you might ask?
What are microaggressions?
They list one example as asking a female colleague, so when are you having children? Other examples include interrupting a person mid-sentence. I thought that was just men and women, men doing it for women, but there we go. Not giving someone your full attention during a conversation, or passing over someone's idea in a meeting. Now, you've worked in the cut and thrust of A&E departments. Can you imagine saying to someone, sorry, you're not giving me full attention. Yes, you may be attending to that critically ill patient, but I want you to give me your full attention. Some of these measures are ludicrous and it is ridiculous, and it must be galling for doctors and nurses to take a look across and see someone who is not in a clinical role, who hasn't had years of training that they have, being paid more than them for a job that they probably can't see a value for.
So I think there are lots of factors in all of this. I think when EDI first came in, it was probably the right thing to do to draw attention to it, but you needed one person per hospital, if that. And of course, it's just one of those things that's ballooned out of all control. Let's get rid of the whole blinking lot, stop painting rainbows on the tarmac and actually deliver good clinical care instead of allowing people to sit in hospital corridors.
You know, I agree with you. And actually, I don't think that having some sort of thing to check and to take a look at what's happening in hospitals and is a bad thing, right? We need to have, ways in which bullying and all that sort of thing can be dealt with. However, this much money?
Exactly. It's absolutely ridiculous. Stay exactly where you are. Keep all of those messages coming in, please, this morning. What do you think of J.D. Vance's speech attacking Europe and the United Kingdom? Also, would you welcome Boris Johnson back as leader of the Tories? Did he ever really go away? After the break, we're going to talk through some of the other big stories making the headlines this morning. A very good morning to you.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good morning to you just after 7 o'clock, Saturday, February the 15th. I'm David Bull and this is Weekend Breakfast. Thank you very much indeed for all your messages already. An hour gone, a very quick hour gone already this morning. Don't worry, I have great news for you, as you would expect for a Saturday. This is a really important one, actually. It's Support an Independent Pub Day, so this is a really good excuse to go to your local boozer. It's a really important initiative to support local establishments in your area, so please do pop into your local pub, show you care, because if you don't use it, you'll lose it.
Last orders at the bar, please. Last orders.
Also today, it's Singles Awareness Day. Yes, a very important day as well. It's also known as Singles Appreciation Day. It follows Valentine's Day. There. It celebrates love for those who are sad and single.
All the single ladies, 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 all the single ladies.
Also, it's World Hippo Day, a day that raises awareness of the third largest mammal on Earth. Now, hippos are natives of sub-Saharan Africa. They can weigh up to, wait for this, 2,000 kilos. Did you check that hippo in yourself to this airline, sir?
Today's fascinating facts.
So on this very day in 1874, it was the birth in Ireland of Sir Ernest Shackleton, British Antarctic explorer. He went on Scott's original expedition in 1901 to 1904 before leading his own in 1907, which got within a short distance of the South Pole. On this day in 1952, the Queen's father, King George VI, was laid to rest in St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. And on this day in 1955, when I just read these things and think, well, what have we actually achieved? I'll tell you why. On this day in 1955, the government unveiled plans to construct 12 nuclear power stations in the following decade at a cost of £300 million. And at least we had an energy policy then. Those are this hour's fascinating facts.
Talk early breakfast, the show we adore. With David and Georgie, we just want more. Biggest news bringing joy to our day. This catchy little show is the only way.
Well, a very good morning to you. I'm joined this morning, as you heard from that jingle bud. Yes!
I can't hear that.
Oh, we mentioned your name. Georgie Frost, the Times Money Mentors editor at large. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
So we were talking about, I'm on a bit of a sort of rant this morning about, I mean, you saw that in that fascinating fact there about the nuclear power stations in 1955. And here we are. Nothing happens. And now we're talking about, oh, shouldn't we build a couple of nuclear power stations, some SMRs and stuff? I don't know what it is. Is it because we have these cycles of sort of 5 years of one political party, then we have another? It seems to me that what we need is a 20, 30, 40, 50-year strategic plan, say, for energy. And this feeds nicely into this story.
Energy, health, you name it.
Energy, health, exactly. And this is this morning. So we've got this big gas field that's been found in Lincolnshire. Well, Miliband sticks to fracking ban days after the field is found. It shouldn't be up to the whimsical nature of any single politician to decide things like energy policy, in my humble opinion.
No, I agree with you. This absolutely needs to have joined-up thinking across the government departments. But it seems like that's not the case. I don't think you can... It's responsible for an elected politician to dismiss out of hand something that could guarantee us energy security for the next 10 years. I think in this current volatile geopolitical environment, it's just irresponsible. And that's not what we elect our politicians to do. It's so that they also consider security within that as well, and also take a wider look at this as if you're not going to produce gas, which we need to bridge that gap. We cannot just stop tomorrow use of all, fossil fuels.
57% right now.
But even,
gas.
I conducted an interview the other day with the CEO of electric vehicles. So, and where do you think the electricity for those vehicles and the charging points come from?
Did you ask him that?
50% is fossil fuels, yeah, absolutely. And it's like, and the energy that's required, I believe, to create an electric vehicle, it would take something like 25 years to keep driving the car.
To actually pay it back.
To pay it back.
Yeah, it
Who is going to be driving an electric vehicle? Can you imagine the technology in 25 years' time compared to now? It's like our mobile phones. We change them every 2 years.
I mean, that's a brilliant point, actually. I'm coming to the end of my lease on my electric car, and I spoke to someone who knows about these things and said, well, shall I carry on? Because obviously the payments dropped dramatically. And he said, oh, no, I'd get rid of it if I was you, because technology is moving so fast.
And this is exactly
And of course,
right.
they don't know how long the batteries last. That's the other problem.
No, precisely. And we're building all of this technology. And look, I'm sure that the ports that we're building, the charging points around the country will be perfectly great to use in 25 years' time, and, but it's a small example of perhaps it might not be, and the technology is just very beta, and I think we're so slow at delivering infrastructure projects in this country, and let's not stick to EVs here. This is talking about fossil fuels and fracking and all that sort of the way that we get our oil.
Oh, Heathrow's third runway, whether it's about HS2. I mean, you could list everything, a catalogue of sort of systemic failures of planning.
So long to do any project in this country that actually, for it to yield the benefits that we want it to, like growth with Heathrow, I'm afraid they don't have the time. But then, look, you just argued then about long-term thinking. Something like Heathrow is a long-term plan. HS2 was a poor longer-term plan. But look, it is a longer-term plan, and that's kind of what we do need to start doing a little bit more of.
I totally agree. Also, just in terms of pubs, if you are just waking up, I want to just tell you the numbers of pubs that are closing. 2,000 pubs disappearing since 2019. The largest closure happened in the last 12 months. 412 pubs shut their doors. The largest number of closures since 2021. It's thought 25% of pubs will close. I was saying earlier, I'm in a battle with in my local community. I'm going to a big meeting about it, about what we do about our pubs, so please do use them or you will lose them. Right, let's talk you through this morning's front pages if we can this morning. This is the front page of the Daily Telegraph. Let's bring that up for you this morning. Vance, free speech in Britain is in retreat is the big headline this morning. JD Vance has warned Britain that mass migration and the erosion of free speech pose a greater threat than Russia to the assembled crowd. This is at the Munich Security Conference. So I should think they all sat there going... He said countries in Europe, and he is quite right in this, had allowed their fundamental values to drift. He singled out Britain in particular, saying free speech was in retreat and Brexit voters had been betrayed by elites opening the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. He said, the thing I worry about the most vis-a-vis Europe isn't Russia, it isn't China, it's no other external actor. It is the retreat from Europe on some of its most fundamental values shared by the United States of America. Downing Street refused to comment, but one voice from the government dealing with foreign policy relations says, oh, this is a pretty simplistic read of a complex set of problems. We don't sit here overjoyed to hear it. No, I bet you don't. That's the front page of the Daily Telegraph. Let's move on to the Times now. This says Britain and the European Union face a greater threat from within, same story, than the danger posed by Russia and China. This is JD Vance. He didn't really actually mention Ukraine, which is why he was there to speak. He didn't really talk about geopolitics. He talked about the fact that the European countries are betraying their voters. And of course, what we are seeing as a result is changing polarity in terms of the way that people are voting. He praised Brexit, saying it had been motivated by concerns he agreed with about migration and attacked German politicians for trying to censor the far-right AfD party in the league. I'm not even sure they're a far-right party, actually. We were in alliance with them in the European Parliament. The Brexit party was in alliance with them, the AfD. But censorship across Europe. Let's move on to The Guardian. Same story. Vance launches blistering attack on Europe's leaders. The US Vice President JD Vance launching a brutal ideological assault on Europe, accusing its leaders of suppressing free speech, failing to halt illegal immigration, running in fear from voters. That's really interesting. Running in fear from voters' true beliefs. He's right. He is right.
I think he has many points in his speech, and I think it would beholden everybody, rather than is our immediate reaction, and mine included. Nobody likes to hear bad
hard
things
truths.
about hard truths, or even anyone criticising.
And also, he is right. He says there is a new sheriff in town.
What is not? You kiss the ring, everybody. By the way,
quite.
Well, the reality is there is, and that speech was a great example of how things are shifting, and it was, it put Europe on alert.
I mean, whether you like Trump or not, he's certainly hit the ground running.
No questions about it. He's absolutely...
I mean, every day there's another presidential order. Show it to camera, big squiggle. I mean, it's... I just think, why don't we have anyone who works like that?
Because...
We have a different democracy.
Well,
for
I was
sure.
going to say, some of those things I think are rather, like, for example, the tariffs. I wonder how much
Yeah, we
they
need
would
to talk
pass
about
muster
that.
with sort of World Trade Organization rules.
Well, he doesn't care about that, does he?
And this is the point,
Yeah.
right? Whereas most...
America first. We're going to make America great again.
Yes, but a lot of those rules are in place for a reason and could protect. So, you know, by raising tariffs on other countries, you know, actually the people that hurt the most are your own country, probably, because things are going to go up and you're going to have to pay more and inflation will go up, right? So, you know, actually there are
But he's
some
also making the point you made earlier about actually knowing where your goods come from and not relying on cheap Chinese imports, for example, which could be a threat to national security as well.
Exactly, right. And you're right, I did make that point. So this is where we need to start thinking about things in a slightly different way. We may not agree with the methods, but actually they are raising important points that certain and large sections of society are concerned about.
Absolutely.
So, you know, the status quo up to a certain point, you could argue, is not working. For lots of people in society, the way things have been done, you know, for example, you know, where your goods are coming from, we should care. We should care about countries that you know, use child labour, for example. Absolutely, we should.
But we all go on to one of these online platforms, whether it's Amazon or whatever.
Yeah,
and
the
you
Chinese
go for whatever.
low-cost retail. Where do you think that stuff is coming from?
Yeah.
Well, who is paying for that $5 dress? If it's not you, someone along the chain is paying for it.
Yeah,
So absolutely we should be considering it. I'm pretty confident Donald Trump doesn't really care about children like child labour across the world. However, if you care about it, you need to say that the status quo isn't working. So find a different way. And it seems like we're so stuck in our way that it takes, you know, some quite extreme measures and extreme people, one might suggest, to really, you know, shake things up a little bit.
Front page of the Daily Mail this morning, again, same story, free speech in retreat in the UK, warns Trump's VP. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in Downing Street and to watch Starmer's face right now. He talks about, he attacks censorship across the continent as well as mass immigration. He said no one voted for mass immigration. He's right. He cites Brexit as proof of what voters do actually want. Even the FT this morning, Vance lays the blame for Europe's plight on the threat from within. There's some peachy lines in here. Who was this? To many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like an old entrenched interest hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation. As I said, the German Defence Minister, Boris Pistorius, labelled the criticism unacceptable, saying he had no choice but to respond. And, of course, he ripped up his speech and laid into Vance. This is a great story. Daily Express, different story. Wheelchair users travel lottery must end. This is Zach Eagling. He's only 13. He is a remarkable young man. He is an inspirational schoolboy. He's set up a petition calling on the government to make train, bus and other travel services more inclusive, and I would agree totally. He says it's a lottery. Trying to get an accessible seat, and I'm sure that is right. He feels there needs to be a sort of nationwide rectification of that problem, and talks about that one of the problems, and I hadn't really thought about this before, that if the train is late, then you haven't got the platform staff to help you onto that accessible seat. Or if there are two wheelchair users, there isn't the accessibility that you first thought about. And good for him. And he talks about the fact that he lives at home at the moment. He's 13 years old, of course. But he says, as I grow older and I want to be independent, there needs to be a way that I can be more independent. Good for him.
This actually feeds into another story in the papers today, which you might not think are related, but this is about the JP Morgan boss slamming people working from home. And we'll go into more detail. But I think if you are a government that is desperate for growth, what do you need to do? You need to, and desperate to get our benefits bill down, you need to make sure that people who are disabled can get to work. It's a simple thing. And if they can't get to work, then at least they can work from home. This is what the government should be trying to encourage. There's something like 19% of the population in the UK that consider themselves disabled. We need to do much, much more to get people, because people want to work. They want, you know, they want to earn money and be useful. Like
self-esteem, and then they're not lonely.
100%, 100%. So I think it's then this is where I tie back in. I think we need to start exploring ways in which we can start making people be able to, fully function. I mean, it's not just getting to work. There's something called, is it the Purple Pound?
Is that right?
Yeah,
For
so you have disabled pound. People want to spend money. They want to go to local pubs. All of those things. If you don't have accessibility, how are people going to do that?
Yeah. That's interesting. So the Purple Pound, the spending power of disabled people and their families.
The Silver Pound is for people
and the Pink Pound, of course, LGBT.
Absolutely. There's lots of colours of pounds. Who knew?
Who knew? I want to talk about JP Morgan because that's a brilliant story. Let me just finish the headlines because I'll get sidetracked otherwise and I won't remember where I am. The Mirror, my Caroline is still saving lives 5 years after she died. This is Caroline Flack's mother has told how her daughter has left a life-saving legacy. She revealed there's an anti-suicide bench in honour of her daughter to help other people overcome dark times. And when I was reading the copy this morning, essentially, she talks about the fact that people obviously have very dark thoughts, and there's this bench that you can sit on. It's got words on it saying, someone is always listening, and provides a spot for people to reflect when feeling low. I mean, look, if you are that low, you need to talk to someone. You need to ring the Samaritans. You need to get in touch with someone. It's crucial.
As someone who's had a close family member take their own life, it destroys a family.
Of course.
You don't just take their life, you take the people around them. And I struggle with the argument, you just talk. And I think this sort of feeds into the well-being, wellness stuff at work. There are very, very big spectrum of mental health disorders. And to think that if only that person could have talked and it would have saved their lives makes me, as that close family member, and all of my family feel like we didn't do enough, and we will always think that.
Of course you will.
But I beg you, if you are in that situation, there are so many organisations that can help. Please, please, please find it. It might be a dark moment, but you are loved.
Absolutely. No, well said, Georgie. Absolutely well said. The Sun front page, married Strictly star falls for princess. This is someone, I don't know who this is, but Dawood Gadami. He's left his wife after falling for the stunning Princess Jasmine. He's starred alongside in a panto of Aladdin. He's a dad of two, 42 years old. He plays a character called Kush Kazemi in EastEnders. Apparently, he sheds sizzling on-stage chemistry with Melanie Barker, 32, at the theatre in Aylesbury in Bucks. And apparently, it's the Strictly curse rearing its head once again. A very strange story. I normally love the Daily Star front pages. You voting for me? This is Robert De Niro's waiting, apparently, to be president. And I was like, what? Yeah, his pal says he would be better than the Orange Man baby. So I'm like, turn to page 4 to find out what this is about. Essentially, he is being touted as the next US president. What? No, not really, because he's... Yeah, no. When you read further down, he plays a former president in as a role, and I think they're just basically pushing the two together. That's quite nice. I'm quite enjoying this, though, and we'll talk about this now. Reeves bricking it. There's a picture of Rachel Reeves at a building site, and of course we've heard all of these stories, haven't we, about her LinkedIn entry, whether she was really an economist for that length of time, whether she fiddled her expenses. I mean, all of this is being dug up. Actually, just in terms of that, let me just go to a break, and then we talk about the economy, because I've got lots of questions for you. We narrowly avoided a recession. We grew by 0.1% in the last quarter, which I think was a relief to those people in number 11. But I'm just quite keen to hear from you, and I'm sure many people are, with your expertise about what people do when they're coming to the end of a fixed-rate mortgage, for example. What's going to happen to interest rates? What does the economy actually look like? We've seen huge public sector pay increases as well from the government. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But going back to two questions which I'm asking this morning. J.D. Vance. What did you think of that speech where he attacked the United Kingdom and also Europe? Georgie's view is it was very much for a US audience. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think he was saying some hard truths, actually, which I think have been well received by many of you. Let me know your thoughts on that. Do you agree with J.D. Vance's comments? What do you think of those? Also, Boris Johnson apparently thinking about coming back, whether to lead the Conservative Party or not remains to be seen. Would you actually welcome Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservative Party? What would that do, actually, to the polls? What would that do to reform? 0344 499 1000, calls charged at the national rate. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well. Also, I know we've touched on some very difficult conversations this morning. If you have been affected by any of the topics that we have mentioned this morning, you can find help on our website. The website address is talkTV/helplines. After the break, we'll take you through some more of the big stories which are making the papers and the press this morning. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
And most of the time, I was asking her questions. That's what I was doing. And that was because I wanted to hold her to account, and I wanted to know whether or not she would be able to answer my questions. And what I discovered was that when she did answer my questions, she gave me platitudes. She did not give me real answers. She was unable to name a single school of the top nearly 100 schools that have had more than +1 on their progress. She hasn't been to visit a single one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk 7:27, Saturday, February the 15th. The day has been brightened up by Georgie Frost, who is playing cricket opposite opposite me. Good morning to you all. This is nice. Steve rather likes you being on, at the risk of being called something by the PC Brigade. Can I say your show is always more enjoyable when gorgeous Georgie is on?
Look at that. Can I just point out, I'm not actually playing cricket. That's not euphemism for anything. I am literally wearing a jumper.
No, you're playing
that
cricket.
Looks
See?
like...
Got theme music playing for cricket.
I think it's because I've not turned up my earpiece, so I've absolutely no idea what's going on. But I've got a cricket theme. That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you to the amazing producers.
Good morning to Lorraine. Hi, David. Can you help? I'm looking for a cave that I can put a comfy bed in, fill with goodies, and then brick up the entrance until two-tier gear has gone. That's priceless. Lorraine, thank you. Go reform, she adds to that. Steve. David, why does it take an American vice president to point out the way we are being betrayed by our own governments? He's bang on when he says our internal threat is far greater. If Europe's leaders are squealing, we know he is right. Well said, Steve. I totally agree with you. Sonia, good morning to you. Thank goodness for Trump and Vance. It's about time this country and Europe were actually given a dose of reality. I love Boris, whatever his faults is. He's a statesman unlike anyone in this selfish, clueless government. It's interesting. I'm listening to his book, his audio book at the moment. I've come nearly at the end of it. But he talks about the way that he supported Ukraine before anyone else, any other European country supported Ukraine. He talks about being on this train and visiting Zelensky. And I was thinking, gosh, you were a statesman back in those times. And he obviously, he had the power of his conviction. Look, I have a lot of time for Boris, but I also don't forgive him for what he did when Reform or Brexit Party stood down, gave him an 80-seat majority, and of course he squandered it and pretended that they didn't exist. But that's my own beef. Georgie, you're a financial expert.
I am a financial journalist.
That wasn't the question. So the UK economy unexpectedly grew in the final 3 months of the year following a boost to construction and services sector. It expanded by 0.1%. We were on recession watch for a long period of time, I think. So there will be a sigh of relief from number 11 that the economy did grow by 0.1%. What is interesting about this, they also looked at living standards. This is growth, GDP per capita, and said they have dropped. The worry, I think, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this. I mean, I don't think we're in particularly buoyant economic health.
No. And so this is why, look, as a financial journalist, I unbelievably appreciate how some of these numbers are, I mean, just a little bit pointless, right? A lot of this is, you know, what measures they're using, and growth is 0.1, and, you know, inflation is this and that. And people listening are going, so?
Yeah.
You don't need to tell me. Right?
Yeah.
You don't need to give me a figure.
Things are expensive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The things are going up, that I feel squeezed. Let me take April, for example. Water bills going up by, you know, hundreds of pounds. Council tax in some areas going up by over 9%. Right? Energy bills, as we spoke about earlier, are going up. I don't need to tell anybody what figures are coming out for them to know that this doesn't feel great. The economic figures, again, and we spoke about this, and I said, oh, you know, 1%, 0.1% Schmitz. It's not because I find it necessarily boring. It's because I find it just it's so marginal. So, you know, what does recession means? Well, it technically means, you know, 2 quarters or 2 3-month periods of declining economic growth, right? So falling GDP. That doesn't mean anything to anyone, really, does it? And 0.1%, you know, what's 0.1% between friends? Well, it's the difference of saying we're in recession or we're not. But the reality is the same.
OK, but the reality is, what does the Exchequer do about it? And so the worry is, from my very limited understanding of economics, so we believe that inflation is going to rise again. We believe.
Yeah, so look, I mean, the Bank of England, when they came out with the interest rate cut recently, said that they expect inflation to go to about 3.7%, I think, in April, as a result of increased energy costs. Now, you know, that's nowhere near what it was, you know, in October 2022, I think it was, when we reached over 11%.
Yeah, extraordinary.
But again, inflation is one of those figures that they take, you know, they measure it by taking this sort of basket of goods. It's, you know, thousands of different items, and they measure it and how much they've gone up by. But your personal inflation will be very, very different. So it depends on what you spend your money on, etc. So that's by the by. But it is a general way of saying that the price of things are going up. And the thing is, we've already had to take on board, what is it, over 20% food inflation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's food and energy that are the ones that hit people the hardest, because it's the ones that you can't
But
cut
that's
back
also
on.
very tangible. You go into a supermarket, 3 items, 20 quid.
Yeah, look, it's going up. What does this mean for the government is essentially what you're asking there, is it doesn't actually mean anything different. We know that the economy is really stagnant at the moment. The government are naturally going to be very worried about it, which is why we're hearing so much noise about growth. Desperate for growth. We had this week all this speculation about cash ISAs, the very tax-friendly savings products
Which
that you
people
can.
like. We spoke about this
People love
earlier.
them. There's over 400 billion sat around in cash ISAs at the moment, and the government are desperate. Well, actually, it was city bosses that in a meeting with Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, said, look, if we could put some of that to use in the UK by investing it, wouldn't that be great for growth? And it might be great for people because their money works harder in investments. But, whether we should force people to do that, I think, is slightly different. But the reality is we've got a spring budget coming up. What is Rachel Reeves going to do to try to stimulate economic growth? The headroom that she thought she had, that no longer is there. Is she going to stick to her fiscal rules, which is basically that debt must start falling as a percentage of GDP in the next 5 years, and we must keep to within our budget? They were self-imposed.
They were.
Would she perhaps move those around? I don't.
Well, she said she won't.
I don't think that's likely. What we've got in the newspapers this morning, I think it's page 2 of the Telegraph, is the fact that what we might see instead, actually, it's on page 1. There we go.
Freezing the bans.
Reeves mulls stealth income tax rise. Basically, how we pay income tax, we pay it in bands. Above a certain amount, you pay a bit more, basically, a lot more.
Yeah.
Those bands at roughly 12,570 for paying no tax. The same, about 50,000 for up to 20%, and then you go to 125, and then you're paying the 45, the full whack. Those thresholds have been frozen since 2021. They are, and that was by a Conservative government. Let's make no bones about it. We are in we're in a tax mess because we've been massively taxed because of the Conservative government, right? It just seems the Labour's not doing a lot about it. This is apolitical of me, just to say everybody's stuffed up, really. But we've got those thresholds frozen until 2028-29. Now, of course, as pay goes up naturally, because the cost of living is going up, you would expect pay to go up. You would also expect those thresholds to go up. They are not. So beyond 2028-29 is a really long time to hold them. Now, the government promised, the current government, that they would not increase income tax, VAT and national insurance. And it seems to be another way, another semantics here, another way of just increasing something but without actually increasing or saying they will. So the national insurance on employers. Well, we're not increasing taxes on workers. No, you really are.
Yeah, well, they said they wouldn't increase national insurance, and they said, employers' national insurance contribution doesn't count.
And the OBR says 75% of that will fall on employers anyway. So employees.
Of course it will.
Exactly. And what they're doing here is, and governments love freezing thresholds. We've seen it with inheritance tax, capital gains tax, anything that has a threshold, you can freeze it because it drags more people into paying that higher rate. What we're seeing the problem is, so at £100,000, we've got this weird quirk in the system. £100,000 is a lot of money, but soon it won't be, and that threshold that we're talking about won't mean anything. But you lose your personal allowance, you lose child benefits, you lose all sorts of benefits. What we're seeing is this perverse system where people are not wanting to get that pay rise or not working more because they don't want to breach that £100,000. So if you want to have growth, you really need to start looking at the tax system. And if you want people to work and work harder, they need to feel rewarded. They're saying this may raise £4 billion, but at what cost? Really, at what cost?
Well, 100%. But it's like the Winterfield allowance as well. At what cost was that?
But there's so, like I said earlier, we counted all of those bills that are going up, etc. So much of our economy is built on confidence.
Which there isn't any.
Consumer confidence,
and business confidence.
And we are reading in the papers as well that it's as lowest as you expect among the super wealthy. We knew that. But also, if people don't feel confident to spend, they're not going to encourage growth, etc., etc. So I just think, going back to that 0.1 figure, it is a disastrous figure for the government. Whether it's recession or not, 0.1% is rubbish, and they need to start
And
looking
I'm
at
glad
ways.
you said that, because, of course, there's this big article saying that actually, yes, Starmer narrowly avoids this technical recession. Alarms going off everywhere. I've got the Growth Commission saying it's really appalling. The IEA also saying the budget fallout is dragging the private sector into recession. I'll have to go to a break. After the break, we'll talk a little more about that if I can. I want to get your advice on interest rates. I'm coming to the end of a mortgage. We'll do that after this break. Keep all of your messages coming in, please. What do you think of JD Vance? Also, Boris Johnson, should he make a return and take over the Conservative Party? Let me know your thoughts on all of that, please. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
40 Saturday, February the 15th. I'm David Bull. I didn't even know my name. Joined by Georgie Frost this morning. Loads of you getting in touch. I'm asking about JD Vance's speech. Was it out of line, out of order, or was he spot on? I said this right at the beginning of the show. If you weren't awake, I had someone message saying I'm absolutely furious with JD Vance's speech. I'm furious that it took an American to say exactly what a British leader should have said in this country. Let me know all of your thoughts on that, please. So many of you getting in touch about that. Also about Boris Johnson. There's a rumour that he is thinking about coming back into the Conservative Party, possibly as leader. I don't think Kemi Badenoch knows about that. And many of you getting in touch about that. I think Boris deserves a fair crack of the whip. He was an amazing leader at the Olympics 2012. I would agree with that. He is a character. He was betrayed by Sunak, who wanted the job. Boris is Britain's best hope for greatness. That's Jeff Huntley in Aberdeenshire. Good morning, and thank you for that. Everyone on the front bench of Labour have not a Scooby about the job they're undertaking. Boris says himself was great for the country. That's Vincent. Boris back as leader, says Steve. It'd be just like the captain of the Titanic holding the anchor chain as the ship went down. We'll take a call now. Jim is in Dorset wanting to talk about JD Vance. Good morning to you.
Well, good morning, David. Good morning, Georgie. Great show as always.
Thank you very much.
Very understated shirt, David, but Georgie should definitely open the batting for England because we're not very good at the moment, are we? In the
Sorry, say that last bit again.
Georgie should open the batting for England.
Yes, you should.
In the one-day international.
Yes, you should open the batting for England.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Right, so JD Vance, right, so he has caused huge headlines, which is across pretty much every front page this morning. He's essentially saying, you betrayed Brexit, you are allowing unfettered immigration into this country and across Europe. No one asked for that. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, isn't it nice to have a breath of fresh air, somebody who actually says what they mean, a conviction politician, who J.D. Vance is and who Donald Trump is, who actually says what he means and what he feels. And if we only had that in Europe, because I'm pretty sure the majority of European voters believe what he's saying and agree with what he's saying and don't believe what their governments are telling them.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And of course, he was there. He was meant to be speaking about Ukraine, a deal, Trump talking to Putin. He didn't do that. He turned his fire on Europe, political correctness, the lack of control over immigration, the lack of integration. I think many people in this country will be sitting there thinking, J.D. Vance is spot on. And you can tell that the political parties are rattled because they are so angry about the outburst.
Yeah, well, whenever there's rage, there's a problem. And if a party rages against something, that means they're not looking inside. And you probably know as well as I do, David, that there's most of the parties in this country are not looking inside themselves. They're blaming the voters for what the voters believe. But the voters believe what they believe. And the only conviction politician we have in this country at the moment as a leader is Nigel Farage. It's as simple as that.
Fascinating call, Jim. Thank you very much for your time. That's Jim in Dorset. Georgie, let's just go back and talk about... I just want to finish this thing on the economy. So we've seen... And I'm really pleased you said that. It's pretty disastrous to have growth of 0.1%. You've seen other European countries growing much faster than we are. Just in terms of interest rates, we mentioned that inflation is expected to rise. We have seen mortgage rates starting to fall. The question is, are they pricing in future interest rate cuts now? Certainly, if you talk to different financial advisors, they'll all tell you something slightly different. That's because no one actually knows what is about to happen. We've got another MPC meeting taking place next month. I'm not putting you on the spot and saying what is going to happen, but what is going to happen?
I mean, personally, I probably wouldn't think that there is going to be an interest rate cut until we see perhaps the fallout from the national insurance rises and all that sort of things. Look, we might get, and this is totally speculation, nobody knows, we might get a couple of incremental cuts through the year. What you're really asking, what people mostly want to know is, you know, what's going to happen to mortgage rates, right?
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
Oh, wow, yeah, you don't happen to have your mortgage rate. So basically, we've seen 7 mortgage lenders cut rates recently. Which we naturally, as journalists, we ask, well, is this, you know, a sign of things to come? Because when we had the interest rate cut very recently, most of the mortgage lenders had priced that in. So you didn't see a huge movement, but we have seen rates now fall to below 4%. People who've been used to the sort of almost sub 1% that we get, I'm so sorry, it's not coming back. Right, let's just get that out now. I mean, it might come back, but it would be highly unlikely we're going to get some of the rates that we've had, you know, a few years ago, I'm sorry to say, which is why we're having so many problems with people coming off their old deals now onto new ones and seeing hundreds of pounds extra a month.
Or doubling of their mortgage.
The question is, should you wait? Now, again, it depends on the mortgage lenders you speak to. I think the vast majority say that while we are getting some better rates recently, something called swap rates, so the rates at which banks lend to each other, and it's influenced by lots of things like inflation, economic sentiment, you know, interest rates, etc. They're actually quite high still at the moment. And you're very rare to get rates fall below what the average is for swap rates, and the swap rates are just below 4%. So until they come down, is a long-winded way of saying it's unlikely we're going to see a huge glut. It's because it makes it very expensive for banks to lend to you at a rate.
If they can't lend or borrow.
If they're borrowing from banks.
Yeah,
like it's
rate.
you know, it's pure economics here on this one, right? They're not going to give you a great deal if they're not getting money back in return, or if they're not getting a good deal. So will we see it? Not unless we see those come down, not unless, and this all goes back to, you know, growth, you know, in the country, interest rates falling, inflation getting better, all of these sorts of things all feed in. So the advice then would be, so you can lock into rates between 3 and even up to 9 months, which means if you find a good deal now, but you don't need to remortgage for, let's say, 6 months.
Yeah.
you can lock into a deal that should another better deal come later down the road before you actually buy another house, or sorry, you remortgage, you can actually almost break that contract, as it were, and get the better
But how
deal.
long do you have to do that? Because I thought it was only like 10 days or something once you'd accepted a rate.
No. So you've got basically you can do it now,
Right.
And if you don't have to remortgage, when's your remortgage? When
I can't remember off the top of my
let's say
head.
it's 6 months,
Yeah,
right?
it's about that.
About 6 months. You could look. I would start looking now. I would speak to a mortgage broker
Yep.
because they know the market and they can find the best deals for you. Because obviously the best deals will be given to those people with the greatest amount of money, the greatest equity in their home, you know, the most deposit, right? Of course they will, but they can also sort of wheedle out, especially if you're a freelancer. It helps because you've got, you know, income that's perhaps not as regular. But so
That's an understatement.
Yes, right. How do I put this? So I would speak, but if you are hoping to wait,
Yeah.
I would always say this, and I actually got asked this by my taxi driver the other day, is, you know, what do you do? And I said, look, and this is about buying a home, should I buy a home as well? You know, your home is your home. If it makes money at the end of the day
Then
and it's an
great.
investment, then brilliant, right? But, you know, now the best time is when you need to do it. And the best time here actually is, you know, we can't say as experts whether we're going to see rates, unless, like I said, those swap rates come down. I don't think that mortgage rates, even if the Bank of England lower interest rates, are going to come down a huge amount. So if you find a good deal now, again, like I said, lock in. But you have that sort of 3 to 9 months. It depends on the lender, of course. With which you can lock in and not commit to that rate if you find something better. So I really recommend doing that, and I really recommend speaking to a broker who will, like I say, know the whole of, or speak to a whole of market broker who will know, let's be honest, more than you about it.
I think everyone knows more than me about this subject. Georgie, thanks very much indeed. We'll go to a break. After the break, it's Tom Clayton will be joining us with all the latest sporting headlines. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
Has invaded a foreign country, flattened it, committed multiple war crimes and genocide. He's wanted by the International Criminal Court, which, by the way, I'd abolish, but nonetheless, he's wanted by it. There's been a cost of $450 billion on this, and we're going to go, congratulations, Putin, have half the country, because congratulations, you flattened it.
Boris Johnson, they instrumented it. They wanted this to happen.
I think the claim that Boris Johnson invaded Ukraine is about as stupid as everything else you've said.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, 8 minutes to 8, Saturday, February the 15th. This is Weekend Breakfast. What did you think about J.D. Vance? His comments, let me know your thoughts on that. Also, Boris Johnson on manoeuvres, apparently. People are saying, actually, a number of people, 5 people are saying that Boris Johnson is thinking about a comeback into the Conservative Party, possibly as leader. What do you think of that? 0344 499 1000. Calls charged at the national rate. Text the word Talk and your message to 87222 and message us on X at TalkTV. I'm very sorry we're late, but it's now time for Tom Clayton's Sporting Weekend.
Tom Clayton's Sporting Weekend.
Hello, good morning. Sorry we're late.
We're late, but we still have time to play that.
We always have time to play
always
that
have
and
time
to do the comedy voice.
Seemingly,
now,
yes.
Manchester City.
Yes.
Explain.
So, this has been a very confusing story that I've taken.
That's why I didn't ask the question.
Yeah, that's why I've been taking months to get my head around it, and really, I think we finally have a bit of an answer as to what's going on. Finally, we got some news about what the outcome is going to be. I want to be clear. This is not the case of the 130 charges that they're facing. That's completely separate. This was legal action brought by Man City against the Premier League and their rules around sponsorship deals. So in the Premier League, they brought in rules called, something to do with associated party transactions. And it was to stop clubs from overinflating their wealth and being able to spend millions of pounds more than they already do. So the idea is, say for example, if a Premier League owner owns a business, or if he's a major investor into one of a business, it means that that company that they were involved with couldn't then sponsor the club and then put a load of money in, make it look like the club are in a much better financial situation. Right. And what the Premier League said was they have to do that at a fair market value. But that was significantly reduced from what it probably should have been. So Man City brought about this legal challenge and basically said, we don't think these rules are fair. They were brought in around the time that Saudi Arabia, the Public Investment Fund, bought Newcastle, and we don't think this is fair because it's not allowing us to spend the money that we have and we probably should be able to put in. A tribunal, after months and months of discussion and everything, finally came out with a decision last night to say Man City are right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was it's a massive blow for the Premier League, who now have to pay everyone's legal fees, which are going to about to around £10 million. And then also you've got to add in the fact that this may have an effect on Man City's other case of the 130 charges. So, as I say, very confusing, a bit complex, but we finally have a bit of clarity, if you can call what I've just said clarity.
No, even I understood it, so therefore it is clarity.
Well,
very good.
I've been practicing that.
Well, very funny, because I spoke to you at your desk earlier on this morning, and then I don't think you were quite in the same frame of mind at
I don't think I was in
this morning.
I don't think I was in the same post.
What are you talking about?
I don't think I was in the same postcode. Never mind the right frame of mind.
Also true. Now, we also spoke about F1, which now this is quite interesting. This is about conversations they have on their radios.
Yeah, that's right. So, a lot of us have seen, so when people watch Formula One, if people watch Formula One, when that little box pops up saying radio message, sometimes there's a couple of bleeped out words because the F1 drivers are saying naughty things to their race engineers. Now, F1's been really unhappy about that. They're unhappy that they're trying to, that they're almost devaluing the products because they're saying bad things. And it's meant to be a family sport. It's a family spectator sport and something that everyone can enjoy. And drivers are now standing up after the FIA, who is Formula One's authorities, have effectively said, we're going to start punishing people to the point where it might get to, race bans and things like that, where drivers might be stopped from driving because they've said some bad words. And look, I know on this station we've spoken about that in the past, but then a couple of drivers have come out yesterday. So Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz, who are the drivers of Williams, they've effectively said it's absolutely ridiculous because, bear in mind, think about a footballer.
Yeah.
A footballer's not mic'd up and can say whatever he wants.
And in the heat of the moment.
And in the heat of the moment. A rugby player, a cricket player, they can say almost whatever they want. And they only get picked up by a referee's microphone that you only hear a month later or so. So I think there's an actual point there. It's kind of like, well, they're grown-ups, they're adults, they use fruity language, and to be honest, the team radio isn't for our viewing
Well,
pleasure.
I was about to say, don't broadcast the radio.
Exactly.
Surely.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, it's a great tool to have, and it's something that's almost part of the viewing experience. But ultimately, Formula One is not a spectator sport. It's an actual sport. It's something that people have their lives invested in.
Fine. Well said, Tom. Thank you very much. I'm sorry time has beaten us.
That's okay.
That was today's Tom Clayton's Sporting Weekend.
Tom Clayton's Sporting Weekend.
Now, Georgie, you're a big fan, aren't you, of F1?
No.
Oh.
Not at all.
Well, I thought you were mentioning that you're doing something with F1.
No, I am.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
going to some event at the O2. I know. Do you know, I former sports journalist.
Yes.
Big sports fan.
Right. Not of
Derby
F1.
season ticket holder.
Yeah.
One might argue that I'm not a big football fan then.
Not.
But F1, it's just driving. It's not. I know it's a major
fast
sport,
driving.
and I cannot believe this non-allowing of swearing.
Yeah.
Do you know what conditions they're in?
Well, I was about cooped up in a tiny little cockpit.
Just think about everybody driving around and the road rage we get. I mean, can you imagine?
It's a really good point, actually.
Right. So yeah, no. But I am
Well,
going
it's
to
like
this
the
event.
broadcasters don't broadcast it then.
No, look, I agree with you. 100%. It's a bit like going into locker rooms in America and sort of complaining about nudity. I'm sorry, that's their space. You know, if you want to broadcast in those spaces, if you want to use those radios, you have to admit that, like Tom absolutely rightly said, they are adults. They're working in incredibly high-pressure environments. I mean, it's almost life and death, literally.
Wow, absolutely.
So, you know, I think a few swear words, you know, or give. Absolutely.
Georgie, thank you so much.
My fruity mouth.
Your fruity mouth. It's been an absolute pleasure
As
to have you
always.
this morning.
Thank
you
you
very much indeed for coming in. So this morning I'm asking, what did you think of JD Vance's speech attacking the United Kingdom and also Europe? Your thoughts on that. Also, would you welcome Boris Johnson coming back in as leader of the Conservative Party? Is that the panacea the Conservatives need in these very desperate times for them? This is Weekend Breakfast.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good morning to you. Just after 8 o'clock now on Saturday, February the 15th. Thanks ever so much for your company. Great news if you are just waking up. No, the weather's absolutely terrible. It's Support an Independent Pub Day. It's a really important day. It's really important initiative to support your local establishments in your area. So I beg you, if you have nothing to do today, please pop into your local pub and show you care. If you don't use it, you'll lose it. Okay, maybe not like that. Get my pub! Well said. Get my pub! Right, also, today is Singles Awareness Day. That's right. It's known as Singles Appreciation Day. It happens every year after Valentine's Day and celebrates a love of those who are awareness of the third largest mammal on Earth. Hippos are natives of sub-Saharan Africa. Wait for this, they can weigh up to 2,000 kilos. I know that feeling after Christmas. Yeah, World Hippo Day.
Hippopotamus was standing one day on the banks of the cool Shalimar. Mud, mud, glorious mud.
Do you know I had that single as a child? Loved it, loved it. Right, let's move on to today's fascinating facts. Today's fascinating facts. Crikey, on this very day in 1971, the British government launched a new decimal currency across the country. The familiar pound, shilling and pence coins that had been in existence for more than 1,000 years were to be phased out in the space of 18 months in favour of a system with 100 pennies to the pound. I didn't know this. There were 240 pennies to the pound before that. So they then phased them out and it became 100 pennies to the pound. On this day in 1981, an English Football League match was played on a Sunday for the first time. And on this day in 2022, Prince Andrew settled a civil sexual assault case brought after him in the United States by Virginia Giuffre, who claimed that he sexually assaulted her on 3 occasions when she was 17. Prince Andrew had repeatedly denied the allegations. The Duke also pledged to demonstrate his regret for his association with the late convicted for Jeffrey Epstein. And those are today's fascinating facts.
Get breakfast, let's ignite with David Gore. The mood is right, sharing stories, laughing loud. Join us now, be part of the crowd.
A very good morning to you. 5 minutes past 8, Saturday, February the 15th. I was just talking about the pubs, actually, just the number of pubs that are closing. 412 pubs shut their doors over the last 12 months. So if you do go, just go and support your local pub. According to this, 25% of pubs will close in 2025 following the budget. I know that my local pub has also closed down and there is a big meeting about it. So if you get a chance, go and visit your local pub. I know they're really struggling. Of course, we've got employers' national insurance being levied as well. It's incredibly difficult for these pubs to make a living, but it's also vital for older people in rural communities to feel there is a sense of community and somewhere to go. Keep all of those messages coming in, please. I'm asking a number of questions this morning. First of all, the front page of the Daily Telegraph, Vance, free speech in Britain is in retreat. Fascinating speech, actually. J.D. Vance has warned Britain that mass immigration and the erosion of free speech poses a greater threat than Russia. This was at the Munich Security Conference. He singled out Britain in particular, saying free speech was in retreat and Brexit voters had been betrayed by elites, opening the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. Lots of you getting in touch about that this morning. Also, the front page of the Times this morning, Vance tells Europe to clean up its own mess. Britain and the European Union face a greater threat from within than the danger posed by Russia and China, according to the US Vice President. He told European leaders in Munich that free speech was in retreat and Western governments were censoring the views of their own citizens. Of course, that didn't go down very well with the European politicians who'd assembled there. And The Guardian, here's another headline. Vance launches blistering attack on Europe's leaders. The Daily Mail, free speech is in retreat in the United Kingdom, warns Trump's vice president. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Also, I'm asking, what did you think about JD Vance's comments on free speech in the UK? So many of you getting in touch about that, saying good. For the first time, it's a great speech. Good morning, Jill from Berkshire. Good morning, David. It was a brilliant speech. He's 100% right, and I thank him for speaking up for the UK. We need all the help we can get. I do not recognise Britain anymore. It is not the same place I grew up in. We're dying as a country, and our culture and Britishness is being stamped out. And of course, if you stand up and you say anything against it or against the government, what happens? You get locked up. That's Jill. Thank you very much. Lots of you getting in touch about Boris Johnson as well. Boris, never again, says Martin Harris. He talks a good game, but he proved to be part of the One Nation Wets at heart. We need proper reform, and the Wets need to disappear to the Lib Dems where they belong. William Holliday, good morning to you. Boris had his chance, vote reform. Good morning, David, says Pat. Boris is deluded if he thinks he can come back to lead the Conservative Party. With his green zealotry, he needs to get back into his box and not come out. This is Robert Morris. For the first time in my life, I voted for Boris to get Brexit done. He lied. He didn't get it even half done. I would agree with that. We were sold down the river by him and the Tories. I'm now a lifelong Reform member. P.S. I agree with Vance. Sean in Gloucester, the return of Boris won't make the blindest bit of difference as the Tories are finished, as are Labour. The world has changed and people have had enough of those two parties taking us for fools. Reform are now an unstoppable force and will have the way for normality to return to this country. I'll read one more. David. Boris has had his day. This is Amanda in London. Good morning to you. Voters want to move forward. Boris's policies, changes, green issues were not well received. Keep all of those messages coming in, please. The number 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also message us on X as well at talkTV. But now it is time for Transatlantic Talk.
Transatlantic Talk with Caroline Faraday.
Yeehaw! Caroline Faraday, how are you?
I am doing all right. I mean, where else would I rather be at midnight on Valentine's Day than with your good self?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I am sorry. I hadn't realised, actually.
That's all right. You didn't get me a card. You didn't get me flowers.
I'll get you a card and flowers.
Same story every year.
It's the same thing. Should we talk?
My earth did move, though, on Valentine's Day, David, because about 10 minutes ago, when I was getting my jacket on, we had an earthquake.
And do you know what kind of, what was it on the scale? Do you know yet?
I was just trying to see they hadn't confirmed it, but it was sort of 3.8-ish.
Oh, so small.
And quite close to me. Oh, listen to you. Made me jump. My little heart was racing.
I remember being in LA and I was walking down the hill and I thought I was just being very odder than usual. And I was walking down and I thought, that's really weird. The ground is moving, and it was an earthquake. It was about 5.5, which is quite significant, actually.
Yeah, that'll do it.
That will do it, you're right. Let's talk about President Trump, shall we? Because there's a lot in the papers this morning about President Trump. Donald Trump has vowed to impose tariffs on countries that charge VAT. So the big story this morning is this leaves Britain at a risk of $24 billion blow to its economy. He laid out this plan for reciprocal tariffs and said, I decided for purposes of fairness, I am going to charge a reciprocal tariff. It's fair to all. No other country can complain. The most interesting thing for me about this is that he is under no obligation to decide he's going to treat Europe as one whole. He can actually pick off various countries as he sees fit.
Yeah, and he seems to be doing that, choosing his friends and then keeping his friends close, but his enemies a lot closer, I think, in the last week or so. There's every week I say, there's a lot to catch up on, isn't there? We can't possibly squeeze it all in. But tariffs definitely and trade have been top of the agenda for Trump, talking about reciprocal deals and the impact on that. I mean, you can probably explain to me better a little bit about how VAT works, because I think there's some sort of disparity of that. That's not the same, right, as it just being a tax on imports. Can't you kind of claim it back? Or
well, you can if you're a company. I mean, I think essentially what he's saying is that if you're exporting to the US and you are charging VAT on that, that is a tariff to the US, and he's going to respond in kind. Look, at the end of the day, he is saying we're going to put America first, and I think I'll ask you, how has that been received across the pond?
Well, definitely eggs have not got cheaper as promised.
No.
In fact, at the moment, you can't even really get eggs unless, like me, you've got chickens. But,
Why?
you know, things haven't got cheaper.
Well, they won't, will they?
And so it was really interesting, because I think this is the way politics is different in the UK, is you just read out a message from somebody who'd voted for Boris Johnson and then felt disappointed by what they'd got from Boris Johnson. And as an outsider looking at politics here, it feels far more tribal than a situation where if, for instance, Trump does something that you could criticise or isn't in the best interests of, you know, that you would criticise, that might cause people problems, the people who voted for him will defend him anyway. That you won't get that instance where somebody says, well, I voted for him, but he let me down. There's this very tribal mentality. So you're still in this situation where half the country will defend anything that he does, and half the country are like, what is happening? This is insane. And that is the situation here, really.
I mean, I think that from the United Kingdom's point of view, the UK government is very keen to avoid any tariff being levied. It could lead to a 21% levy on goods exports to the US if he does target the VAT. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that Trump views the EU with enormous suspicion. Now, whether the UK gets away with being treated differently, and of course after Brexit that is possible, remains to be seen. But Trump very much in the driving seat here.
Yeah, and I think he will struggle to sort of see a Labour government as his friends. You know, Trump does require an amount of kind of flattery, and, like, you know, there's a way to play Trump, isn't there, and say, oh, you're so amazing, sir, everything you do is great, and then he'll say, oh, I trust him, he's amazing. Like, for instance, when he was talking about Putin, where Putin has flattered him, then it's very easy for him to say, well, I trust that guy. So it is a whole, you know, the whole playbook is out the window, and sometimes it does feel as if he's sort of making it up as he goes along with whoever he likes this week. So whether or not that will be I like the UK government, I think that's going to be a harder. They are meeting, aren't they? They're meeting quite
allegedly.
soon. So,
yeah, I mean, the way that Trump tends to work is he will go in with an unbelievably difficult offer. That is the art of negotiation, and then obviously he knows where he is going to come back to. And in many ways, that is what he has always done. He is a deal maker.
Yeah. He's an interesting negotiator, because I think with his real estate background and from what I know and have seen of Trump, he's the sort of negotiator that sees negotiations as win and lose. So America have to be the winner and you guys have to be the loser. And a lot of negotiations, particularly internationally, you can have sort of two people who have the same goal, who are negotiating for what they want. And, you know, and you can work together to negotiate. So, but his style of leadership and his style of negotiation is very much win or lose. And he's very determined that he will be the winner, and that therefore you would glean from that he would see any other country, the UK or any other country, as the loser.
And of course, I think the other thing here is he is playing a game of divide and conquer, because he will decide, I mean, for example, with Italy, with Giorgia Meloni, I imagine he'll be far more on side with Italy. Germany, desperate to try and reduce any kind of tariff on German-made cars, for example. Huge market in the United States. And of course, the UK government trying to work out what on earth they do. Mr. Trump wrote on Truth's social platform, 3 great weeks, perhaps the best ever. I was saying earlier that whether you like like Trump or not, I admire the fact that he's got on with stuff. We keep seeing these presidential orders, you know, being signed by him. It seems to me that he is getting stuff done. As I say, you may not agree with necessarily what he was doing, but it kind of the juxtaposition with our politicians in this country and just a lack of general direction that's coming out of number 10 currently.
Yeah, look, that is Trump's go-to, isn't it? I am the man who's going to get things done. I'm going to do all of this on day one. That plays very, very well to his base. It's not necessarily the way it should be done, and some of those things will get held up in the courts.
Of course. How
How much attention it gets paid to, what gets held up in the courts and what doesn't. But certainly, yes, there have been incredible changes already, enormous changes to the US and US policy in just the short time that he's been in the White House. To go back to your car point, one of the things, I mean, so where he'll be looking there, he'll be looking at, okay, well, if we're going to have German cars, we want to send American cars to Europe. And then you're getting into a whole different debate, because it's not just about tariffs, it's about safety. And a lot of American cars, or Cybertrucks for that matter, don't meet European safety standards. So that's why there aren't many of them in Europe. So there will be a whole other negotiation having to go on about whether or not Europe is going to lower its safety standards and how to get past that. Because, yes, German cars are passing those safety standards that American cars simply don't.
That's fascinating. Hadn't considered that at all. I don't know if you've had time to see this or whether it has actually made the news in the US, but JD Vance standing up, not talking about a solution to Ukraine, but actually laying into Europe, laying into the United Kingdom as well, talking about the lack of free speech, the lack of, or certainly uncontrolled immigration into this country. Many people in this country are saying, thank goodness, at least a politician standing up and saying it as it is. What a shame it isn't actually someone who is a British politician.
Well, JD Vance is a disruptor, right? He's a culture war, person. That's his background. That's where he comes from. So he's going to come in from that stance, and that is going to be, there's not enough free speech, there's not that, and he's going to play into those kind of culture wars, I think, that are going on, and those conversations that quite rightly you're having and trying to navigate and and find a path through. And I think some European leaders, may have been expecting something very different from JD Vance, but he very much, set the stall out of, this is the way that America plays. We're not going to come here and, make conversation about how we're going to get along and work together. I'm going to come in here and tell you what I think of you. And, and that is, that's JD Vance's game for sure. Yeah, that's his...
he certainly made headlines, let's put it like that.
He sure did.
Now, Donald Trump has met Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. Modi has held a mega partnership with the US. He and Trump agreed on a deal for Delhi to import more American oil and gas. A 2-day visit from Modi. This is interesting, isn't it? Because at the same time as doing that deal, he's talking about imposing tariffs on India, and India is a vital trading partner of the United States.
Yeah, huge trading partner. At the moment, they operate with a $50 billion trade deficit in India's favour. So once again, Trump is going to be there, fighting for what he sees as America's interests. And obviously Modi has to come in and get along with Trump. It's worth, an enormous amount of money. So, there was a friendship as they kind of figured this out and had a big bear hug. And Modi went for the MIGA, M-I-G-A, which is a play on MAGA, of course, make India great again. As I said, that is the way to please Trump, is this wonderful flattery, and I think that is something that he responds very well to. So, yeah, there's some fairly incredible scenes from the press conference where Donald Trump couldn't understand accented British speaking reporters that were a bit awkward and a bit tricky.
Right.
But there we are. That's peak Trump, isn't it?
And also, I mean, I was just reading here, the US is the largest export market for India's goods and services. But also, Trump added the US is going to increase sales of military hardware to India by millions of dollars. This is quite interesting. Also supplying Delhi eventually with F-35 fighter jets. I wonder how that plays out internationally, because India is in quite an interesting position in terms of its foreign policy, but clearly Trump keen to do military deals.
Yeah, look, as you know, with Trump, it is all bets are off, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is a whole new landscape. You know, he's gone into the situation in Ukraine as well. I think you can sort of, you know, compare where he's gone in on, you know, and had these sort of big input and then said, well, I want Putin back in G8. And, you know, he's got very different friendships and very different dynamics to what has been the kind of status quo for the last few years. So it's interesting to watch and hard to predict how it will play out.
And of course, one of the other things that made that meeting was talking about the numbers of Indian immigrants who are there illegally in the United States. This leads into your final story here about left-wing activists coaching illegal migrants how to avoid deportation and telling them how to fight back. Explain.
Well, this was a story that appeared, I think, in the Telegraph in the UK. And actually, it's very interesting because I think when we talk about immigration and when we talk about it in the UK, it is such a different issue. You know, we're using this same umbrella term, but immigration, the immigration in the US is very different to the immigration issues that you have in the UK. And so you can't solve it by the same things. Well, for instance, a lot of the people that we're talking about them being deported have probably come here as 2 years old, only speak English, you know, didn't make the choice to come here in the first place, were educated here, have worked here, pay taxes here and have jobs here. And there are these kind of mixed status families. So there are a lot of people in that position, in mixed status families, where, you know, I think if you take out of the equation where we're talking about the deportation of criminals, which is about half of the people that have been deported so far, what you're talking about is people who are here without the correct documents, as opposed to people that are here stealing and breaking other laws, right? And I think you can differentiate between that. As opposed to the issues, you know, these are people that are paying tax, that are contributing, that are working. And I think that is different to the arguments that you have in the UK about migrants and illegal migrants being a drain on the system. And I think those two things are sort of very different in the way that they're handled. So there has been a lot of conversations and kind of coaching for migrants who are getting, you know, subject to ICE raids about what their rights are, who they can respond to, you know, whether law enforcement have the rights to come in, and kind of making sure that people know what their rights are. And actually some legislation introduced on the Democrat side, which, by the way, stands no chance of passing because you've got a Republican House, but nonetheless, for years, no matter who was running the country over here, there were certain protections around where immigration raids and deportation raids could take place. And that was that they couldn't take place in places of worship, schools, and at food banks. And on the first day in office, Trump abolished that. And so these deportation raids can now take place in places where you might be dropping your kids off at school. And a lot of people feel like that's a bit of a step too far, that you shouldn't be going to church, or scared to go to church, or scared to get food, or even scared to seek medical help in that situation. So it's a very complex situation, and some people might have that same argument. It's a bit more like a Windrush situation where people need to find a path to legally stay, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, but surely there is a passage of time. If they went there as kids and they were taken into the United States and they're undocumented, surely there's a passage of time that once it passes and elapses, then the state has to say, OK, you're now a naturalised citizen, doesn't it?
You would think there would be that pathway, and that doesn't necessarily exist. And that's what, when in the Obama era, that was what the Dreamers Act was. That was kids who'd come here, you know, at sort of 2 years old with their parents who were undocumented. So they don't have a life in another country or a family in another country. Their family's here, their life is here. They speak, I was going to say English, but American English. You know, they're not. They wouldn't have a life and a community, you know, to sort of go back to, for want of a better phrase. And so you're right, it would seem more logical in a humane way to say, is there a path for this person who wants to work, who wants to pay tax, and who didn't make a choice to come here themselves, to have a path to citizenship after an amount of time. But that there is far more of a feeling, I think, of like, from the Trump administration, of being like immigrants are somehow, I don't know, poisoning the country, as opposed to finding that path. And so that is where activists are kind of stepping in. There we are. I think I just about navigated.
Well, I
through
think
that.
I think you did. I think the point you made, which is the immigration's issues, and they are similar in some ways, but actually there is this massive amount of immigration that's happened over the years, which is very different to what we're seeing here in the UK, where you've got undocumented people coming here illegally into this country. We're not processing them. We haven't actually removed them from the country. They are very different indeed. Always good to talk to you, Caroline. Thank you very much.
Happy Valley Day, or happy next day after Valley Day.
It's Singles Day today. Singles.
Oh.
Yeah. So there you go. That was today's Transatlantic Talk. Thank you, Caroline. Right, after the break, we're going to be heading to our head-to-head. Joining me this morning is going to be Gawain Towler, Westminster comms veteran, and also Lewis Oakley will be joining him. That's all still to come. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
The democratisation has not happened in Reform UK, and I don't see it happening anytime soon.
When you that's Nigel Farage on the phone already. When you come back, Job, he's like, when you say the democratisation of the party, are you referring to the sort of ownership of the party as distinct from it being a conventional party? Is it that, or is it something else?
No, you can't remove Nigel. That's the top and bottom of it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, 8:32, Saturday, February the 15th. So many messages coming in. We're talking about Boris Johnson this morning as well. Tim Cook, Tim in Portsmouth, good morning. The only party to get a boost if Bozo Johnson makes a Tory comeback will be Reform. No one will forget the mess that buffoon left us all in. Tim, thanks for that. Good morning, David. I can't trust Boris on Europe and mainly immigration. Yes, it's worth remembering, of course, under Boris Johnson, he opened the floodgates to legal migration into this country. On paper, he looks good, says Lee, but he is no Churchill. Good morning, Dr. David, says Rachel. Good morning, Rachel. I'm loving the show this morning, thank you. In answer to your question about Boris, I think he planned a comeback all along. I think you might be right there. Oh, this is quite interesting. Caroline mentioned that JD Vance is a disruptor. Steve says, so somebody who tells the truth is considered a disruptor. Good morning, says Russell. Good morning, Dave. I'm asking about JD Vance's speech. What did you think of that speech? Lots of very cross people across Europe this morning. I'd love to be a fly on the wall of number 10, let me tell you that. David, all you need to know about JD Vance's speech is the virtual silence of the woke, wishy-washy liberal politicians who made up the audience. He was giving it to them straight and they didn't like it. Great speech. Well, I'm going to put that to our panel now. It's now time for Head to Head.
Head to Head.
Well, joining me this morning in the studio, Gawain Towler, a Westminster comms veteran, and down the line I've got Lewis Oakley, who is a political genius, I'll call him that, and a podcaster. Good morning to the two of you.
Good morning, good morning.
Shall we start with you, Gawain? I mean, just in terms of JD Vance, he came over to the Munich Security Conference. He was there to talk about Ukraine, the possible deal that's being done between Trump and Putin. He didn't do that. He launched into a broadside about massive migration, about the lack of free speech, particularly in Britain. My jaw dropped open and I thought, thank goodness someone's saying it as it is.
Yeah, I think it sort of reminded me of Trump 1. When Trump 1 came over in his first presidency and warned the Germans that they were putting all their energy eggs into the Russian basket by just closing down all their power stations and having all the gas coming from Russia. And he basically said, you guys are doing the wrong thing here because you're putting yourself, basically, somebody else has got your parts in a grip. And the German state and the German politicians literally laughed in his face. Then Ukraine happened. And guess what? Germany was paralysed.
Yes.
And he was right. This time they've done the same thing. All these grand panjandrums of Europe standing up there and saying, rubbish, rubbish, rubbish. But it's true.
Lewis, is it true?
Oh, it's really interesting. I think JD Vance is echoing what a lot of people think, right? And I think what the general feeling has been is that whether it's concerns around immigration or free speech, especially our government and Keir Starmer have been able to just brush it off and pretend it's not happening. But what's interesting about this is that you know it's a lot harder to brush off international leaders. And when an international leader is flying in and saying, look at the state of things, then things get a bit more interesting. However, I would caveat that with no one liked when Obama came over and started intervening over Brexit. So how much we should put weight on a foreign leader coming over and saying their opinion, fine, they're entitled to do it. Good, nice to hear an opinion. but it doesn't mean we have to change everything just because of what JD Vance
but
thinks.
to be fair, it was at the Munich Security Conference. He is saying that there is a major problem in the United Kingdom and in Europe as well with regards to people not being able to express their opinion, not being allowed to have free speech, unfettered immigration, and essentially he is saying that is undermining the security of those countries. That's where he was going, Lewis.
Yeah, and he's entitled to think that. I don't think he's necessarily madly wrong. I'm just saying that, you know, we can't just decide we like a foreign leader's opinion on something just because we happen to agree with it. We have to put that all in context of there are many different perspectives around Europe from all of the other leaders that might say, well, actually, he's a bit misled here. I don't think he's terribly wrong. I hope he holds up a bit of a mirror where our leaders kind of say, look, the people are saying this, the international leaders are saying this. We are going to have to move from our position even a little bit.
Sorry, Gawain.
I think one of the things very, very valuable in which he said, what is it? Europe faces many challenges. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there's nothing America can do for you. And what's more, there's nothing you can do for America. He's basically saying, look, listen to your own populations. You have been doing things for years and ignoring them and dismissing them. You've been shipping millions of people into this continent of yours and then silencing your own people when they complain. If you can... What is the point of fighting if you no longer know what you are fighting for? What is the point of a society if that society is being ignored? That I think is the big danger he's been trying to highlight.
And we saw Boris Pistorius, the German defence minister, change his speech as a result of that.
Petulant.
It was petulant. And also the fact he says what JD Vance said was, and I quote, it wasn't acceptable. I think it was perfectly acceptable.
Of course. Pistorius has a very different ballgame to play.
Of course he does.
He's got
But they still have major problems with immigration in Germany.
He's got an election in a couple of weeks' time, and he is terrified that the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, will do well in that, very well in that election.
Well, Elon Musk actually said vote AfD.
Well, he has done, yes.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the point is for Pistorius, this is existential.
Yes. Lewis?
I think what's also interesting is that JD Vance is saying this and not Trump, because with Trump, I think the world leaders can say, well, we can wait you out 4 years. But with JD Vance being the only, you know, successor on the table at the moment, you know, they could be looking at this kind of opinion for the next 12 years, in which case they will have to move. They will have to shift their opinion.
And just in terms, if I may just ask you, in terms of what we thought we were going to be talking about, which is an end to the Ukrainian solution, it's interesting, Pete Heads there saying Europe cannot continue to rely on the US. They refuse to commit US troops to the ground in terms of peacekeeping missions. Also, this idea that joining NATO is unrealistic, and to return to those pre-2014 borders was an illusory goal. I think that is essentially what they were saying. I mean, in many ways, and I've been thinking about this, it's pragmatic in some ways, and actually we should have acted earlier in 2014, but is it appeasement?
I don't think... Well, it's not Sudetenland. If we'd acted in 2014 and done something about the Crimea, which nobody was prepared to do at the time, then maybe people demanding more and more bombs and bullets may have a point. But we didn't. And that is the reality we've got. We've got to face reality. We have a meat machine grinding millions of young men and young women's lives into dust, and nothing is being done. I hear everybody whinging about America, saying, guys, sort this out. We've got to stop the killing. Oh, but that's appeasement. All right, Germany. All right, France. All right, Italy. Are you sending your young men to die?
Yeah.
Are you? And if not, what the hell are you talking about?
Lewis, I am nervous, and I think Gwen has a great point, and I would agree with that about 2014. If we were going to do something, we should have done it then. We didn't do that, and there has been a huge passage of time. I think it is unrealistic to expect Ukraine to go back to pre-2014 borders, but I'm equally nervous that this sends a very bad signal to Putin. He gets what he wants. It will embolden him. We heard yesterday Zelensky saying there is intel chatter saying that this is a precursor for Putin to regroup to then reinvade the entirety of Ukraine. Can we trust him?
I wouldn't trust him if I were you. Look, I think you're right. This started with Crimea, and it should have been dealt with at the time. And I think that's the thing about having strength. And once you have not shown strength, look what happens. I think the reality is there is not going to be a good outcome of this war. It's already too late. Look at how many people have died.
Yeah.
It's already too late for a solution that the majority of people are going to be happy with. But hopefully we can move to a situation where there are no further deaths and we have some sort of solution in place that at least allows those two nations to live in peace. I don't know. I don't know about Putin's regrouping and coming back again, because I think that he was shocked at how hard he found it. I mean, in those early days, I think he thought he was just going to walk in and that would be it, and Zelensky would take off and that'd be a done deal. Actually, I think he's found it much more harder than he anticipated. And so I think he's looking for a way out.
That's without doubt. A final comment before the break.
One thought is possible is that if you draw a very deep line in the sand with a peace treaty between Russia and Ukraine, brokered by America, which is clearly because the European Union just sits there and whinges on the sidelines, and then say, OK, we have that peace, but we then put in NATO peacekeeping troops along that front line, then the regrouped Russia thing, Russia goes back and regroups and reinvades. Well, at that point, if in the peace deal, just as I grew up in Germany because my father was based in Germany in the British Army on the Rhine. 40 years after the war ended, there were British troops there to keep the peace against, in fact, Russia.
That's a great point.
So if we were to say, draw that line, it is awful, it is dreadful, the Ukrainians have suffered appallingly from this invasion, but how do we stop it without a defeat of Ukraine? Draw that line, make the peace, put possibly British, European, American troops in that zone, then it's going to be very hard for Russia to reinvade. And that's, in fact, it would annoy him because he hates the idea of American troops right on his border.
Well, of course
but
he
it's
does.
his fault.
It's fascinating.
He invaded.
It is fascinating. Gwen and Lewis, thank you for the moment. We'll take a break. We'll continue with our head-to-head after this break. Good morning.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, 8:46, Saturday, February the 15th. We're in the middle of head-to-head. I'm joined by Gwen Towler and Lewis Oakley. Let's talk about the government actually has some plans. This was from the government's own website. Over 100 sites across England have come forward to be considered for next generations of new towns. Now, this is according to the government blurb. The government is on track Really? To create beautiful communities, provide affordable homes, deliver much needed infrastructure. They say they're taking on the blockers. 20,000 homes, along with new schools and health facilities, will move forward following government action. They are planning major reforms to planning to sweep away the blockers and push through its house building agenda as plan for change. Gawain, surely this is the right answer, which is actually what we need to do is to do a Milton Keynes. Start thinking about actually creating new infrastructure, new towns, put all the infrastructure in first, and then develop the towns, not just adding willy-nilly to towns and villages across the UK.
Yes, I guess.
You're not very enthused.
Yes, clearly the planning system has. I think the most common animal in Britain is the great crested newt, because whenever there's an attempt to build anything...
No, a bat tunnel.
No, yeah, I suppose. But it's bats and newts.
Yes, bats and newts.
Those two are massively, massively common. We're told they're rare every single time they turn up, and any time anybody wants to build a garden shed.
Yeah.
No, you can't do that. There's great crested newts. And I think there's some jumping spiders as well that are pretty scary too. No, the point is I do not... 100 places have come forward and says, yes, please build 20,000 homes in our backyard. I don't believe you.
No, I don't believe you either.
Rubbish. And if they are, it's a couple of developers have written in saying we want to make some cash. We understand. Of course, people need to make money. But what I think is very, very entertaining is this is going to go in direct contravention on the net zero thing. House building is massively energy expensive. It needs to be done, but it has to be factored in amongst other things. We need to reduce the planning restrictions. We desperately do. But, yes, we need these houses. But can we stop ramping up the population by bringing people in to need even more houses? Otherwise, it's going to be a housing Ponzi scheme, and we're going to have no fields, nothing left. And anybody who says, oh, but the vast majority of the countryside, the UK landmass isn't built on, yeah, and it's mostly lumps of Scotland where nobody wants to be.
In terms of that, and Gwen has a great point there, and I will mention one other thing here, Lewis. It's all very well saying you're going to build infrastructure and put in doctors' surgeries. We don't have enough doctors in this country.
Look, the plan needs some finessing, but I've got to say, I was excited about this. I've got to be honest. I read this and thought, thank God this is the first good idea they've had as a government. They clearly were listening to the last time I was on your show where I was saying, go all in on housing. I think this is a great idea. Finally, they get something. Look, the housing situation, I know for a lot of people that are listening that maybe already have their house, everything feels fine and what are people worried about? But for young people and our young people that are completely disenfranchised now, that are saying, look, I have done everything right. I've gone to university. I'm working my way up in a career job and I can still barely afford the bedroom in this, 3-bed house with strangers where there's mold on the ceiling. I'm trying to save to afford a house. It's so out of sight because houses are something like 8 times the average salary now. We have to do something. And I think for a long time, people have been saying it's not enough to talk about just building houses.
But if you're going to build 1.5 million homes, which was the same criteria that the last government had, 1.5 million homes over 5 years, which equates to 300,000 houses every single year, it is much better, surely, to build a new Milton Keynes. And I remember, I don't quite remember, but when Milton Keynes was first proposed, there was a huge amount of resentment towards Milton Keynes. I would actually say that Milton Keynes functions extremely well.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think that there is still some old-fashioned thinking here. I would like to see them start talking about prefab homes. Now, prefab homes worked well after the war. There's a lot going on in Europe.
Would you live in a prefab?
Yes. If there are some prefab homes now in Europe that are being built. They are being built for, literally like £30,000. They are insulated better. They can even be moved around, so you can even move them.
Basically,
there are some really good, and I know it sounds mad, but in the 80s, if I had told you, oh, by 2025, you'll be going to the bank on your phone and things like that, people would have said mad. What we need is a technological revolution of homes, and if you look at what is going on with prefabricated houses, it is really kind of.
Okay, let me put that to Gwen. The answer is a prefab.
I suspect they call them modular homes.
Modular, that's right. Yes, not prefab. But is that the answer?
I remember when growing up, there was a song my mother had down in the jungle, sitting in a tent, better than a prefab, no rent. They were necessary mainly to fill up the bomb damage after the war. But 90% of the time, people were very happy to move out of them into a solid home. They are a stopgap solution. They're not a solution. It would be like a Palestinian refugee camp that was built initially 40 years ago and becomes that refugee camp almost becomes a solid town. Yeah. This sort of prefab construction. I think would be something as a temporary
but the whole
temporary
point was
measure
to build
that would,
beautiful homes.
Well, it's a temporary measure that will be stuck with, and I think you better start properly rather than start with a prefab.
Start properly.
But you're talking about prefabs from the war. The prefabs now, the tech has revolutionised
modular homes. I have to go to a break. After the break, we're going to be talking about Boris Johnson and whether his comeback to lead the Conservative Party would put a dent in the lead that Reform UK has in the latest poll. Is that the solution? We'll be talking about that after this break.
I deeply sympathise with anybody who's given up on the Conservative Party. I think that its performance in the last 14 years was a disgrace.
It's caused permanent damage, though, hasn't it?
It has caused permanent damage to the party and to the country. I think the failure of Badenoch to acknowledge this, frankly, and to break with that past, frankly, is a disaster.
She won't leave the ECHR, which is ridiculous.
Well, I mean, the problem is she's reluctant even to do that, and as I keep pointing out, you can't just pull out of the ECHR.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
we're in the middle of head-to-head with Gawain Towler and also with Lewis Oakley. Let's talk about Boris Johnson very quickly if we can. According to The Telegraph, Boris Johnson is eyeing up a political comeback. 5 of his allies have told The Telegraph. They're saying he's growing bored of life away from Westminster. There is unfinished business. Guess what? He's at the Munich Security Conference. He's held calls with Donald Trump. He's still on the phone to Vladimir Zelensky as well. Lewis Oakley, is that what the Conservatives need? They need Boris Johnson back?
Absolutely not. He had his chance. He messed it up royally. You know, I remember that day where everyone was handing in their notice and he had to go. They got rid of him. It's done. We don't need to go backwards. We need someone with dynamic thinking, someone that can really take the nation with him. Look, I know he's got enthusiasm, and that's great. And I think that we do need that, and that's not what we're getting from Kemi. But at the end of the day, I could never have him back after what he did in COVID.
Gawain, his hero is Churchill. Churchill did it. He's still young enough to do it. He's younger than Theresa May when she was Prime Minister. Boris Johnson, is he coming back?
The only way that Boris is any way like his hero Churchill is his way of spending other people's money. That's the only similarity between the two men. I'm sorry to say. No, I found it very interesting. One from a different broadcaster put a poll up on their Twitter, and this is a GB News chap, Steve Edgerton. He said, should he come back? Yes, 11%, no, 83%. And that is from a centre-right readership. I mean, Steve's followers are mostly on the right. They obviously don't want him back. Nobody trusts him. Nobody in God's green earth has ever done well by believing a word that Boris Johnson has said, be it personally, be it professionally, or be it politically.
Let me ask you just very quickly, if I may, about Rachel Reeves. Sir Keir Starmer says he has full confidence in Rachel Reeves after questions were raised about her CV, the use of expenses, as we know. Full confidence. How long she got? Like a day?
Well, that sounds like a week in football terms. Tell me it in football terms, David. No, that's the last thing anybody wants to hear is the boss saying he's got full confidence in you. I think the crumbling CV and classically a crumbling LinkedIn profile
and she said, I worked
disastrous.
as an economist for the best part of 10 years.
Well, no, initially it was 10 years.
It was 10
then
years.
When it starts to crumble, it was the best part of 10 years. And now it's 5 years and 6 months. We took a year out to do an MA at LSE. So it's actually less than 5 years she spent working. And as a junior analyst, not as an economist. And then she claimed to be an economist at HBOS. No, she was Rachel from accounts, actually. She was Rachel from complaints. And that is... It is falling apart. Now, if Labour's... When Labour came in, everybody said the adults are in the room. Well, if the adults lied, they weren't adults.
I think he knows that she has got to go. I think he's just trying to find the right time to do it. I think he'll let her go through the spring, and maybe we'll get a budget or something there.
But hang on a minute. She'll then deliver a spring statement. She already doesn't have fiscal headroom. She will then freeze the tax bands. People are going to be poorer. So Rachel from accounts is going to inflict more misery.
So why get rid of her now?
But why would she...
If you're Keir Starmer, you wouldn't get rid of her now. Let her be the bad guy and then get rid of her after the spring.
Gawain.
He needs a lightning rod. And when the lightning strikes, he can get rid of it.
What can Labour do to reset the level or lack of confidence that the public has in Labour and its economic policies? Gawain.
I think they have to stop, look and listen. They clearly haven't been. Right. They are charging down more than... yes, we're talking the growth agenda. The growth agenda is directly in contravention with their green agenda, which is directly in contravention of building homes. And the whole thing is going round in circles. They are punishing the countryside, the 500 million they want to get from inheritance tax from the farmers, meanwhile giving 500 million away to farmers in Africa. The whole thing needs a pullback, rethink, restart.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good morning to you. It's just after 9 o'clock on Saturday, February the 15th, 3 hours in if you've just joined us, where have you been? But nevertheless, I have great news for you this morning. It's Support an Independent Pub Day. Really important initiative, actually, to support local establishments in your area. Look, if you don't use your local pub, you will lose it. So many pubs are closing. So pop into your local pub today and show you care.
Probably the best pub in the world.
Last orders at the bar, please.
Well, there you are. Also, today is Singles Awareness. Thank you. Thank you, Peggy. It's also Singles Awareness Day. It's also known as Singles Appreciation Day. It happens every year after Valentine's Day and celebrates love of those who are sad and single. Similar theme, actually. It's World Hippo Day today, a day that raises awareness of the third largest mammal on Earth. Hippos are native of sub-Saharan Africa, and they can weigh up to 2,000 kilos. I know that feeling all
Today's fascinating facts.
So today's fascinating facts this hour, really interesting actually. The British government in 1971 launched a new decimal currency across the country. The pound, shilling and pence disappeared. They've been around for 1,000 years. They were phased out in the space of 18 months in favour of a system with 100 pennies to the pound rather than 240. On this day in 2015, investigators uncovered what is thought to be the biggest ever cybercrime. More than £650 million going missing from banks around the world. British banks were thought to have lost tens of millions of pounds after a gang of Russian-based hackers infiltrated the bank's internal computer systems using malware, which lurked in the networks for months, gathering information and feeding it back to the gang. The illegal software was so sophisticated it allowed the criminals to view video feeds from within supposedly secure offices as they gathered the data they needed to steal it. And on this day in 2023, do you remember this? 52-year-old Nicola Sturgeon announced she was going to resign as Scotland's First Minister. She was Scotland's first woman First Minister and the longest-serving First Minister. She assumed office on the 29th of November 2014 and represented the Scottish National Party. And those are today's fascinating facts.
Weekend breakfast, feel alive and right. With David Bull, everything's just right.
Well, a very good morning to you if you are just waking up. My goodness, the headline's pretty much the same across all of the papers. JD Vance was there in the Munich Security Conference to talk about the end of the war in Ukraine. But he didn't do that. He actually turned his fire on Britain, talking about the lack of free speech in this country, talking about unfettered immigration, talking about the failure of Brexit. All of those things I agree with wholeheartedly. The same headline in the Times. Vance tells Europe to clean up your own mess. That is what he is saying. European leaders absolutely livid at Vance's speech. The Guardian as well. Vance launches a blistering attack on Europe's leaders. He talks about this in the Daily Mail. Free speech in retreat in the UK. That's right, because if you say what you think in this country, there is a potential that you get locked up by the thought police in this country. JD Vance, I think many of you do agree with him. Let me know your thoughts, please. Do you agree with JD Vance's comments on free speech in the UK? 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. So many messages coming in. Also, Boris Johnson on manoeuvres. It is thought he was trying to wheedle his way back into the Conservative Party. He's watching Kemi Badenoch and thinking, well, she's not doing very well. We showed the latest poll earlier from Find Out Now, which came out yesterday, showing Reform still in the lead at 29. Second in that poll is the Labour Party still. Conservatives in third place. Now, JD Vance was meant to be talking about the end of the war in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky says he can't see a ready US plan to end the war in Ukraine. This is what he said as he arrived at the Munich Security Conference. Trump said that the US was going to meet Russia and Ukrainian officials. Moscow says they aren't actually sending a delegation to the security summit. And of course, we've got Trump talking to Putin almost ignoring Zelensky in the process. It's complicated, and some really strict sort of measures being implemented by the United States, much to the fury, I think, of Zelensky and many leaders across Europe. Joining me now is Peter Conradi, who's Europe editor of the Sunday Times and author of Who Lost Russia? How the World Entered a New Cold War. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What's your reading of all of this? So obviously Trump has come into power. He picks up the phone to Putin, says, right, we've got to do a deal. He is the king of the deal maker, and then is dictating terms to Zelensky and to Europe, essentially saying, well, this is my reading of it, that any return to pre-2014 and those areas that were annexed is fanciful thinking, that the US doesn't want to have any kind of a peacekeeping role going forward. And it seems, I don't know how much Zelensky is being involved in these talks.
Yeah, I mean, it's as ever with Trump, it's all a little bit chaotic. It's a little bit like someone who comes into a room and picks sort of objects up or picks all the cards up and sort of throws them in the air. We don't, we really don't know what is going to emerge from all of this. I mean, so there are a few points. I mean, one of them is that sort of Trump has said what I think, everyone else kind of knew but didn't really dare say openly, which is that Ukraine is not going to win. Ukraine is not going to get back the territory it's lost to Russia since the war started in 2022, let alone Crimea, which the Russians grabbed in 2014. So that's sort of one point that Trump's made. But, what he hasn't really said is, what the plan for peace is. My suspicion is that they don't actually have a concrete plan for peace. I mean, all this started very dramatically on Wednesday when Trump announced that he'd spoken to Putin. Now, when world leaders speak to each other, there are kind of two kinds of conversations they have. One of them is the kind of traditional kind of conversation, which is all the lower level people have been talking among themselves. They sort of set up a concrete plan, and then the two leaders just sort of talk to each other for a few minutes to sign off on it. There's another kind of conversation, which is a kind of a getting to know you talk, sort of starting the ball rolling. And that, in a sense, I think is what Trump has done with Putin. But we don't know what's going to emerge at the end of it. We do know that what the Americans don't want to do, or what Trump doesn't want to do, is actually put American troops on the ground in Ukraine, somehow as a kind of a buffer between the Russians and the Ukrainians. He wants the Europeans to do that. So Trump just wants to set the kind of the tone of some kind of a deal, and then move on to some other part of the world to cause chaos there as well.
What do you make of this in terms of Trump saying to Putin, oh, I'd love you back in the G7, which was obviously the G8? Is this an opening salvo? Is this the art of the deal, that he's cozying up to Putin to lure him in so that he can actually get what Trump wants, do you think?
It is really baffling. I mean, it's really difficult to work out what is going on in Trump's mind, really, because, Putin is someone who has been widely condemned by, the Western world, America in particular, for the invasion of Ukraine. So, what exactly is Putin saying to him? It's, oh, this was a little misunderstanding. We can all just sort of move on. Hundreds and thousands of deaths later. It is very, very difficult to fathom. And I think, as ever, it's going to take a few weeks until this we see exactly what it is that the Americans want, because we're getting very contradictory signals from Trump itself, from his various, his defense minister, Secretary of State for Defense, and various other people who have a kind of a role to play. Maybe things will become a little bit clearer by the end of this weekend, because this conference in Munich is going on until the end of Sunday. There are a lot of influential people here sort of talking to one another. But, at the moment, really, it still is anyone's guess what is going to emerge from all of this.
And I don't know whether you saw Ben Wallace's piece saying that this is akin to appeasement. This is a Chamberlain moment. So essentially you're saying to Putin, oh, well, we forgive you from nicking parts of Ukraine. And all you're going to do is embolden Putin, that he's regrouping. Zelensky said there's intel chatter that actually what Putin is sort of planning to do is to wait, to regroup, and then to attack and invade Ukraine once again. Is this appeasement?
I mean, it looks very much like appeasement, because it's saying to Putin, essentially, you can keep what you've got. it may also be realistic because there is no way, I think, without massive military intervention, which the West certainly doesn't want to do, to get back what Putin's got. It's appeasement. It's necessary appeasement, perhaps, but you've got to couple it with something that says, right, this is a line, this is a solid line, and we're not going to let you, Putin, get any further across that line, which means something solid militarily along that line, coupled with concrete security guarantees to prevent Putin from actually pausing, regrouping, rearming, and then having another go at the rest of Ukraine.
And so what would that look like? Is that a NATO presence on the border? I mean, the other interesting point about this is that Zelensky is determined to join NATO. Now, Pete Hegseth has said NATO membership is not a realistic goal. Well, that's news to Zelensky. And at the same time, Keir Starmer has said, actually, I side with Zelensky and that NATO membership is something that Ukraine should aim for. Now, Keir Starmer is going to have to decide whose side he's on. Is he on the EU side with that kind of mantra, or is he on the side of the US?
Yeah, I mean, let's say NATO membership is not going to happen, because in order for a country to join NATO, you need the unanimous agreement of all the existing members. And I mean, there's been a huge degree of hypocrisy in the West as far as Ukraine and NATO membership is concerned. I mean, it was first said in 2008 to the Ukrainians that they could one day join NATO. 2008, very, very long time ago. Huge amounts of things have happened since then that have negatively impacted on Ukraine. So, there's no, Keir Starmer can say he's in favour of NATO membership. It ain't going to happen.
But Downing Street issued a statement yesterday, and this is the comment. The Prime Minister reiterated the UK's commitment to Ukraine being on an irreversible path to NATO.
Yeah, but the question is, how long is that path? That path has already been from 2008 to 2025. I can see that path extending far away into the distance because, as I said, you can't get around the unanimity rule. And even if the Americans didn't want, even the Americans say, right, we're vetoing NATO membership for Ukraine, the Hungarians wouldn't let them in. Plenty of other countries in Europe wouldn't let them in. There is a, let's say Trump has sort of stunned everyone as ever by speaking out. But, underneath it all, there are a lot of European politicians, I suspect, who are a little bit relieved that Trump has said the
unsayable
truth, the awkward truth that they couldn't really bring themselves to say while reconciling that with support for Ukraine.
And I think that's the key here, isn't it? That European nations are exhausted with giving fiscal support, military support to Ukraine. It's a never-ending journey, it seems, and they have big problems of their own domestically.
They do indeed, and I mean, also you get certain countries, particularly Germany, who have always been, certainly under Chancellor Scholz, who's been there since 2021, who've always been very concerned that if there is an escalation, that somehow it will turn into a full-scale war and that the Germans will be involved in it. They'll be a target for the Russians. So there's always been, since the beginning of the war, this kind of support, but with one arm tied behind Ukraine's back, or Europe tying one arm behind its own back, whatever the analogy is. They want to support the Ukrainians up to a certain point, but not to the point where they completely defeat the Russians and provoke a reaction against Europe from the Russians. And that's been the case since the beginning.
This morning, in a few minutes, actually, Zelensky is expected to address the Munich Security Conference, which I know you have to go and cover. What are you expecting him to say?
I think he's just going to reiterate the need for some kind of security guarantee. I think he's come to accept and openly to acknowledge the fact that they're not going to get back the territories that they've lost. But, he just wants some kind of guarantees, I think, from the West, but particularly from America, that there will be, that what Ukraine has got already will be defended by the West and by Americans in particular.
How does that work, though, in practical terms? Because if Ukraine isn't a NATO member, and we know that if you're a member of NATO, an attack on one is an attack on all under Article 7, but if you're not a NATO member, what are we saying? That there would be international support to ensure that the borders of Ukraine, the current borders of Ukraine, are preserved, and to station forces there to make it very clear to Putin that any further invasion or incursion is unacceptable. Is that what we're saying?
I mean, that is a theoretical way that one, you can almost imagine there is a line drawn through the middle of Ukraine. There are European troops, Western troops, all the way along that line, standing in the middle, saying to the Russians, if you come over this line, you're not just attacking Ukraine, you're attacking us, you're attacking British soldiers, you're attacking German soldiers, and so on, and we're going to fight back, and we're going to take the war to Russia. That's the theory. I'm very, very skeptical that something like that would actually happen. I mean, first of all, have we, Britain, the rest of the NATO, European NATO countries, got enough troops that we could deploy? I suspect not. Would we really be wanting to deploy so many forces there? Have we, you look at the surveys showing, the number of people that are prepared to fight ultimately. Do we really want to go to war for Ukraine? And I suspect 3 years on, no, we don't.
Really good to talk to you. I know you have to go. Thank you so much for your time, Peter. That's Peter Conradi there, Europe editor of the Sunday Times and author of Who Lost Russia? How the World Entered a New Cold War. President Zelensky is about to address the Munich Security Conference, actually, so it will be interesting to see what he says. Also, Starmer's position is really extraordinary because he is now siding with Europe against the United States. The whole point about having an independent, free country away from the European Union is we set our own path. So he has to decide who he is going to side with, and I'll tell you where my money would be. Let me know your thoughts on all of that, please. Do you agree also about J.D. Vance's comments talking about we've lost it in this country. We don't have free speech. We've had unfettered immigration. He's saying the unsayable, what politicians in this country should be saying. Loads of you getting in touch about this. Julie, good morning, David. I love your weekend show. Thank you. That's very sweet. About Vance's comments about Europe and the UK, well, quite honestly, I think that Vice President Vance let Europe and the UK off very lightly. Julie, thank you for that. Christina, hi David. J.D. Vance has said everything for the people. He's been our only voice besides Reform UK, who are constantly being put down. Thank you, J.D. Vance. As for Boris coming back, waste of time. He's had his chance. Great show. Christina, thank you. So I'm asking this morning, do you agree with Vance's comments on free speech in the UK? It's certainly ruffled feathers across the rest of Europe. We've got various ministers saying that what he said was unacceptable, people's jaws dropping open across the EU. Also, I'm just keen to know what you think about Donald Trump. Is this... In terms of saying that Ukraine can't actually go back to pre-2014 borders and then talking to Putin, is that appeasement? It certainly looks like appeasement. Or is it pragmatic? Let me know your thoughts on that. Also, would you welcome Boris Johnson back? Is he the solution to the Tories' woes? Loads of you still getting in touch about all of this. Susan says, J.D. Vance is my hero. What a great moment. Boris Johnson will never be a right-wing leader because he's married to a Liberal Democrat who holds more influence over him than public or opinion or his own common sense. David, this is Stephen Middlesbrough. Good morning. Didn't the Tories start plotting to get rid of Boris from the day he was elected? It's a gimmick. The Conservatives are desperate. We can't be fooled again, and we should never forgive them for the state of this country. David. We were talking about new towns as well. The government says that loads of places across the UK are saying they would like a new town to be built near them. I'd like to see the data on that. So the government is planning to build lots of new towns. Well, what well-paid jobs are all these people going to do in the middle of nowhere? That brings me nicely to JP Morgan, who are telling people to get back into the office. And we'll talk about that, actually, in just a minute. It's a great article, actually. We'll talk about that in just a minute. What are these people going to do in the middle of nowhere? David, great show. I don't think government need to build the homes. Just put the new town infrastructure in and sell the self-build plots to people. They then buy them and they employ local builders to build them. Better quality, locally built homes. Not sure it would work for the developers, though. It's a really intriguing idea. David, just watching today's head-to-head, probably the best one ever. Super content, great observation, excellent comments and opinions well expressed. Thank you. Please invite Gawain and Lewis back on soon. That's Nick in Horsham. I certainly will, and it's very good of them to take part. David says, Sue, one of our regulars. Good morning, Sue. I appreciate Boris Johnson. I associate Boris Johnson with net zero and mass migration. So if he came back, the Conservatives will perish. He does not support the British people, only himself. Good morning, Dr. David. This is Carol. Great panel today. Great JD Vance speech. I'm in a hurry as I'm off to help at a Reform UK meeting in Worthing. Have a great day. Thank you to Carol in Shoreham by Sea. So what do you think about JD Vance's comments on free speech in the UK? Also, would you welcome Boris Johnson back as leader of the Conservative Party? Is that the solution? 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged at the national rate. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also send a WhatsApp, a voice note, all of that as well. And you can message us on X as well at talkTV. Still to come this morning, Denya's Delight. Steve Denya, Virgin Radio presenter, will be here in just a minute. He's going to be talking about a movie I'm desperate to see, actually. This review of Bridget Jones, the latest in the instalments. 5-star reviews from what I've read. We'll be talking about that after this break. Good morning.
She claimed, and I'm talking about Rachel Reeves, something approaching £750,000 over 3 years. It's an awful lot of money. And you just think to yourself, you know, how much of that now should we be looking at?
But I think it's time to look again at everything. I found that when I was an MP, obviously because I got elected on the issue of public trust in public life, I'd be above reproach myself. So you look at your records.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. 9:27 already, Saturday, February the 15th. Lots and lots of messages coming in. I'm asking, should Boris Johnson come back? Should he come back as leader of the Conservative Party? Is that the answer for the Conservatives? This is Monica in Sheffield, rather droll. Boris Johnson, no, 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 as Thatcher said. Very well done. Loads of you getting in touch about this. Dave in Portsmouth, Dr. David, at the time Boris was popular. There was no credible alternative, though, at that time. UKIP at the time were not established. They weren't politically viable. He was the closest we had to a right-leaning option. He's now been exposed as a left-centrist. We now have a real alternative. That is reform. Keep all of these messages coming in. Brian in Spain, lucky you. Apparently the weather's really good in Spain. I looked yesterday. Hi, David. How can we believe the polls when they tell us there are still people who would vote Labour? It's unbelievable. Good show. Thank you. Not great show. Good show. Good morning. The Tory and Labour lot have failed for years. We need reform now. We need control. The current situation is back rusting the country. The whole system needs to get back to basics. No more net zero hopes. No more woke processes. Keep all of those messages coming in, please. But now it's time for some entertainment news.
Steve Denye's Entertainment News Roundup.
Oh, there you are. I couldn't remember what it was called. Entertainment News Roundup. Steve Denya, good morning.
Well, according to me, it's a great show, and it's about to get even greater now. So,
that's very
good morning.
Now, congratulations, because it was World Radio Day, wasn't it?
It was this week.
And you've done a couple of years?
28 we worked. I think it's 29, actually.
Really?
Misleading. I counted back. Let's just go with 30.
So you started at 1?
You're being very kind.
I am, you're
extremely kind. I started in 1997. Actually, I started on hospital radio when I was...
Dave Doubledecks.
I would have been about 15, I suppose, 15,
Which
16.
hospital was this?
It's not there anymore. It was called West Hill Hospital in Dartford, and I think the radio station was called Darts Radio or something. But it did me little bits. I was horrendous. I made every mistake that could be made.
But that's why you do it, isn't it? And actually, it takes
it's a good way to start.
But I remember hospital radio, and of course the patients were really reliant upon it. And I remember those headphones that looked like a stethoscope, you know, that sort of hung out of people.
We used to go around the wards asking for requests, and it was interesting. It's a great way to start. It's not actually on air, so you can only hear it like within the hospital. But yes, so ever since.
And how do you think over those 28 years has radio changed?
It's changed a lot. As we know, it's televised mainly now, so it's not just radio. It's multimedia. Also, there are so many. See, lots of people say there are not that many opportunities anymore, but there are so many new platforms now with podcasts.
True.
You can have your own social media channels, so there's still the opportunity. The opportunities are just different. But to say that I've been doing it for 30 years, I'm so lucky and grateful because we know people who are not doing it anymore. 100%. I know so many people, you know, when I started out, who literally have had to find other jobs. So to be sat here with you on a Saturday morning in 2025, here we go. It's good.
Do you know, it's really funny. So I started in television in 1997, which also, I think, what's that, 29 years?
Amazing, isn't it? We've done well. Congratulations.
Well, thanks very much. Yes, let's see if I make 30. We shall see.
Anything could happen.
Well, anything could happen.
Can we start?
Yes.
First little question. I'd love viewers, listeners to text in favourite movie soundtrack or favourite movie soundtrack. So you've got Berlin, Take My Breath Away from Top Gun. You've got
1983.
Fame. Do you remember Fame, Irene Cara?
Of course I do.
Do you remember Footloose?
Yes, Kenny Loggins.
Kenny Loggins. Yeah. You've got Unchained Melody from Ghost. We'll get back to this. But favourite movie soundtrack song ever? And give us the reason
I have
why.
to say, the album to Top Gun, it has to be pretty up there.
I think every household had that album.
Yeah.
Also, Dirty Dancing. I think they were the big ones from the 80s. But anyway, we'll loop back on it. Can I start with a movie that everybody's talking about?
Yes. So this is Bridget Jones, right? And I saw the trailer. I messaged you after.
Well, can I play it?
Well, you can, but I'm just going to tell you what.
Okay.
I saw the trailer.
You messaged me straight away.
I did. I messaged straight away, and I've never really, but I thought I have to see this film actually. And often when you get the sequel or whatever, they're never as good. But OK, we can play it for
Should we have a look?
Let's
this
have
is the film everyone's talking about.
Mr. Wallicott. Now that is what I call a rebrand.
Did you have sex?
Did you have sex?
Did you have sex last night?
Yes.
I did. I had a full night of utterly mind-blowing sex, and it was amazing.
And she turns around this in front of the studio audience. And of course, he's on This Is Leo Woodall.
Yes.
He's front page of the Telegraph.
There we are.
This morning. What's the headline here? I don't mind being called a toy boy. I'm sure
there you go.
Don't.
So this is the fourth movie, and this is special on a number of levels. So yesterday I took a bunch of winners from Chris Evans' show over to the studio that has made all of the movies, working title, and we sat there.
Where's that?
It's over by Marylebone in central London, and Eric Foner, who's basically he's the guy who's put together 4 Weddings and Love Actually, and all these films spoke about how it started and what they wanted to achieve with this movie. Did you know, for example, Kate Winslet was supposed to be Bridget Jones, and she actually signed on the dotted line, but Titanic got her instead. And they were like, well, who should we use? And there was lots of controversy about Renee Zellweger being an American playing a British person, but I think she smashed it, hasn't she, over the years?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about this film. Now, this film is surprisingly emotional.
Is it?
Yeah. I mean, what I think is we've grown up with these characters, and like, you know, we've grown up as well, so our lives have changed. The first couple of movies were funny, they were hilarious, there's lots of, you know, awful moments.
I just remember the sliding up and down the fireman's pole,
yes,
you know, where they kept
and all of that.
Yeah.
And they still have moments like that, but of course we've now got Bridget dealing with grief and you know, all the matters surrounding
so I didn't
losing
realise
somebody.
he died.
Well, he died, and I didn't want to, you know, spoiler alerts.
Well,
and
sorry,
stuff,
but it's in the. I think it's in the trailer.
Colin Firth's character, Mark Darcy, has died. Now, this was in the 2013 novel, the Helen Fielding novel.
But it didn't happen in the third movie, did it?
No, it didn't. So,
see, that's why I was very
So
confused.
you'll learn as soon as... I don't want to give out too many spoilers,
Sorry.
but basically the start of the movie is very much... You've got Bridget, who's 52. She's got the kids who haven't got a dad. And everybody giving her different life advice about what she should be doing. And, you know, it's quite sombre. I mean, there was sobbing. There were the people crying within the first 10 minutes. And then it gets light and it gets brilliant. And Hugh Grant's, of course, amazing.
You're
but
very naughty.
It finishes and literally the lights came on and everybody was sobbing.
Really?
Everybody was sobbing. It's a great movie. The thing is about this movie's got heart and it's got soul. And it's dealing with life, and it deals with all the matters that, you know, that we've had to deal with growing up. If you've ever lost a parent or lost somebody who's really kind of, you know, pivotal in your life, you'll watch this and go, this is really good. It really speaks to me. But don't get me wrong, there's great funny moments, and, you know, the hot gardener there and the swimming pool scene, and there's lots of good stuff. But it really is, it's a grown-up film.
Right.
Yeah.
And would you give it 5 stars?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I want to see it again. It was so good. Stay right until the end. As soon as the credits roll, you've got all the best bits from the previous movies popping up. You know what's rare? What the director said about this film is we've never had a female character that has lasted over kind of 4 movies over the period of 30 years and played by the same person.
That's interesting.
And they were saying what they hope this movie will do is make directors, you know, carry on employing ladies that are older than 50 to play roles and not replace them with younger models.
I saw one clip of the friends all gathering around over the dinner table, and I thought it was rather lovely. It's the same people, it's the same friends, all telling Bridge what she should do.
Yes, and even the characters that have passed away are in this film. Kind of almost posthumously as a kind of flashbacks. It's very clever, very poignant, but it's not like the other movie. It's my favourite Bridget Jones movie. And the other thing, if there are people watching and listening thinking, do I need to see the other ones?
That's what I was going to ask.
You don't need to.
Right.
I'd say this is a perfectly great movie. You'll get it. There's flashbacks. It's just brilliant. And we wake up this morning that it's had bigger pre-sales than Barbie. It's the #1 movie for Valentine's Day. Most people saw it last night. Honestly, every cinema's booked out tonight.
Oh.
And there's so many different
Can I
showings.
see it tomorrow?
I think you probably can, but book it. Book it, because everybody's talking about it. And with reviews like this, everyone will want to see it as well.
They will.
But you know what? You will cry. I guarantee you will cry.
All right.
But in a good way.
In a good way. Steve, let's go to a break. We'll continue with the entertainment news after this. Good morning.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. We were talking, Steve Denier's here, we were talking about this Renée Zellweger. David, isn't Renée Zellweger playing Bridget Jones a classic case of cultural appropriation? Where are the protests from the lefties? That's Bradley.
Well, the director said there were lots of protests. Lots of people said they didn't want to watch it. It shouldn't be an American person playing. But Kate Winslet
carries it off so brilliantly.
Yeah, and the accent is so great. It's so great that when you actually see Renée Zellweger now talking American, you're like, what's happened?
Yeah, it's just the whole idea of big knickers as well, but it's all very funny.
The big knickers are in the movie. Don't worry, they make an appearance.
Brilliant. And certainly, I don't think there's a girlfriend of mine that wouldn't understand that reference.
Yes.
Right. Shall we? What should we talk about now?
Well, this is a story that's grown. So Peter Kay is on tour. Peter Kay was on in Manchester last Saturday, and there were a couple of hecklers in the crowd, and they got removed. And one of the hecklers has said it's not fair. Apparently, Peter Kay reportedly said she looked like Lisa Riley, and it's all kicked off. And now lots of comedians are getting involved, and it's a fascinating. I'm sure everyone listening or watching has had a thing where they've gone to see a show and somebody has started heckling, it's a big problem in theatres with people drinking too much, and they start getting up and think they're part of the show, when in actual fact you should just sit down and be entertained. Peter Kay said, look, I gave these people, some guy was shouting garlic bread constantly, and this girl apparently was shouting, Peter, I love you, but obviously a few times. And he's doing his set, and the set's scripted, and if people are getting away of the punchlines, what happens?
And it's not fair for those people who've paid good money. They want to go and see...
Yeah, exactly that. So some hecklers are saying, so it's really interesting. Jimmy Carr tries to shut it down immediately, and he's quite offensive to people. So offensive, in actual fact, you would be silly if you went back for more.
Right.
Other comedians are saying, well, we have it's almost like a 3-rule solution. So you address the heckler. The next time they try and do it, you say, look, it's really interesting, but you're spoiling it for the rest of the audience. And the third time you do it, you shut them down, and that's kind of removal time. But it's interesting to find out what people think about this. It's an increasing problem.
But did he have a code word for security to remove them, or did he say
he
remove them?
asked the security to remove them. So this was 2 occasions in one show. The Manchester crowd, turns out, is quite leery. So I think lots of people will have different opinions on this.
If there is a funny heckle, a one-off, that can work.
Yes.
But not repeatedly, and not if it doesn't make any sense and you're drunk.
No, but I do think Peter Kay and the hecklers would be a great show. Maybe we should, maybe there should be a bespoke show. I often see there's a great cabaret artist called Myra Dubois who does the Royal Vauxhall Tavern in London, and the whole show is based on heckling. So you go, it's a bear pit. You shout things out, and she owns the audience. It's very funny, and that's fine if you know that that's the kind of show.
And also the artist knows it's that kind of show.
But for lots of people, they will become increasingly frustrated.
And so comedians rallying around Peter Kay.
Peter Kay basically saying, you know what, it's a tough one, but there's, they've all got these kind of comebacks for hecklers. However, if you go overboard, don't be surprised if you're kicked out, because you're ruining the show and you're ruining it for other people. And these Peter Kay shows are expensive.
Yeah. Just very quickly, loads of people getting in touch about their soundtracks. I won't go through them now.
Okay.
But just to let you know, they are coming in thick and fast.
Can I tell you about something I saw at the theatre?
Go on.
Cirque du Soleil.
Yes.
Celebrating their 40th anniversary.
It's amazing. So I went to see O.
Okay.
Which obviously I didn't know was a play on water.
Yes.
Until I'd seen it.
The water one's supposed to be incredible.
It was incredible. I think I saw it in Vegas, actually. It was incredible. The whole thing was extraordinary.
They've done so many big shows. They've got, in LA just before Christmas, I went to see the one at Santa Monica Pier, which is more like a traditional circus. Can I show you a clip of the Royal Albert Hall show? This goes on.
Royal Albert
I know
Hotel.
something else then. This goes on till March.
So for those people listening on the radio,
Yes.
I would say there are huge overtones there with Moulin Rouge. It's that kind of feeling of dramatic theatre. It's kind of a spin on circus, isn't it?
It is. It really is. It's called Cortio. It doesn't need a storyline because you're just watching out for the brilliant effects. You've got people swinging from chandeliers. You've got beds hanging up mid-air and people backflipping like between beds. And it's so dangerous. And the thing is, the first time ever, one of the female dancers fell.
Yow.
From one of the beds in the middle of the show, and there was an almighty gasp. Of course, they have safety nets.
Yes.
She was visibly so annoyed.
Oh, annoyed?
Annoyed. She was bashing her head, and then a ladder had to come out. She had to get back up on the ladder and rejoin the bed. And then also they were doing some kind of juggling thing, and one of the batons flew out into the ground. It was like Carry On Cirque du Soleil on Wednesday night.
Were you there for this,
But
then?
seriously,
Oh,
it
my
was brilliant.
goodness.
We got a box. You know James Max
I
from
do
Miss
know
Paris.
James
He
Max,
has a
yes.
box. He invited me to go and see it.
Does he
and I
now?
thought I really wanted to review it
I'll
for
be
you.
ringing him, saying, where was my invite?
The thing is, it's two 1 hours with a 25-minute interval, and it goes so quickly. I mean, you just blink your eye, and there's brand new people on stage doing, death-defying, amazing acts. And apparently these people, these artists, dancers, or illusionists or whatever, they're born into families, and that's how they can do these amazing things. If you got me on one of those things, it would be an absolute disaster.
Well, quite.
There'd be a crater in the stage.
They would not. Not.
But honestly, it's great. It's quite expensive. The tickets are kind of around £80 or whatever, but it's going on till March. And the Royal Albert Hall is the perfect venue for this. It's very plush. It's gorgeous.
OK, shall we talk about where do you want to go? Do you want to go to the theme tracks?
Yeah, should we do
Yes,
that?
yes.
Tonight on BBC Two from 8:30, there's movie moments, songs from movies, best soundtracks.
Yes.
What's yours?
Do you want a few? I've got this one, Melanie in Watford. One of my favourite film soundtracks is Midnight Express. Sorry to be so old. This is David in Birmingham. The theme from Lawrence of Arabia. It's a beautiful film, beautiful music. They don't make films like that anymore. Also, this one, I love the soundtrack to The Trap. So nostalgic. I'm enjoying the programme this morning. Thank you, Pauline, in Milton Keynes. Oh, I mentioned Milton Keynes earlier. David, Bugsy Malone, wonderful album and memories. Jodie Foster's debut film, that's Glenn in Colchester. Then we've also got this one, which is down in Kent. The soundtrack albums to Train Spotting and The Beach are fantastic.
Oh, I agree with those two.
Do you? And also, in terms of soundtracks, Busy Bird says anything from Dirty Dancing, Days of Thunder. Now, in terms of the production team, which obviously is very important, we've got Davis, who, according to this, is a visual producer, news to me. La La Land is his favourite. I didn't like that.
Oh, it's lovely. It's great. Yeah, it's great.
It's all right. Visual producer, I've done that. Tech Op Dave, The Greatest Showman.
Very good.
Yeah. I think he was watching that earlier instead of counting.
This is
AP
me.
Tommy, Mamma Mia. Very good. And producer Dean, The Bodyguard. I wouldn't have had you down. That's a great soundtrack.
Can I have one?
Yes.
Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet with the Cardigans, Love For, and also with that amazing You and Me song by the Wannadies is on that soundtrack. It's really, really good. Really, really good. Train Spotting, I have to agree. Train Spotting, incredible. One of those, movies and movie soundtracks that propelled everybody else to up their game. Yeah, really
Anything
good
else?
stuff. I've got a fancy seeing a documentary this weekend. It's really good. This is on Sky. It's a story of Christopher Reeve. You know Superman.
I do.
Who obviously
he was paralysed.
He was paralysed at the age of 42. He passed away at the age of 52. Most of us remember him as Superman,
We do.
but things drastically changed. Beautiful movie with a lot of Robin Williams in. Robin Williams, the late Robin Williams, was his best friend. And this documentary ends with people saying if Christopher Reeve had lived a bit longer, Robin Williams would still be alive because they were so... It's a real tragic story that we've lost them both. Incredible, upsetting, but what a story. And what a life well lived. He did so much good for people who've been paralysed. And there's that famous kind of scene at the Oscars where he went on stage and he got... It's really, it's a tearjerker again, but really powerful. And it's on Sky Documentaries, and I recommend it.
Steve, always good to see you. Thank you very much. Steve Denyer there with today's entertainment news. Right, after the break, we'll be going through some of the key moments.
News Roundup.
Speaking actually to the Munich Security Conference, I'll bring you some of the key moments from that speech. Also, I'll be taking some of your calls. I want to know your thoughts, please, on JD Vance's speech attacking the United Kingdom and also the EU over the immigration issues we have in this country, the lack of free speech, that if you say what you actually think, you get locked up. What do you think about that? Also, would you welcome Boris Johnson back as leader of the Conservative Party? Would that propel the Conservatives back into government? The number 0344 499 1000. We'll take your calls after this break. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
Now all of a sudden, when they said to America, please help, this war's going on a long time and we're scared of Putin, and Trump's like, OK, right, I'm getting in there. Don't do that. Don't talk to him. Don't offer him anything. Please give us money. Please give us weapons. And I just think, well, look, I'm not saying that, you know, whatever conversations Putin had with Trump, that I agree with all of it. We don't know what's been said. There could be some tactics at play here. All I'm saying is, you know, Europe should have woken up a long time ago.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk 9:53. Jenny, you are right. David, everyone has forgotten Rocky. I would agree with that. Also, I agree with Graham in Bushy. You can't go wrong with the soundtrack from Saturday Night Fever. Absolutely. Lots of messages coming in. Good morning. The Tory and Labour lot have failed for years. We need reform now. We need control. The current situation is back rusting the country. The whole system needs to get back to bases. No more net zero hoax. No more woke protesters. Also, I'm talking about JD Vance's speech, which was pretty eviscerating of the UK and the EU. Now, at the Munich Security Conference, President Zelensky has just spoken. He's launched an attack on Russia for attacking Chernobyl's nuclear reactor. He actually says Russia is not preparing for dialogue. It keeps opening new army recruitment centres. He went on to say Putin can afford it. Oil prices are still high enough for him to afford it. And this is the point I made earlier. He's reiterated this again. We have clear intel that he will send troops to Belarus this summer. That's the concern about this being appeasement. Is this force meant to attack Ukraine? Maybe, he says, or maybe it is meant for you. Russia does not want peace. He went further as well. This is going to make very unpalatable reading from certain political quarters. The armed forces of Europe must be created. He said, I believe the time has come to create an armed forces of Europe. Money alone will not stop an enemy assault. It's not just about budgets. It's about people realising they need to defend their own home. Our army is not enough. We need support. Those are the words of President Zelensky. Let's take a call now. Dave is in Hatfield. Good morning, Dave.
Morning, David.
Good morning. Good morning. What's on your mind this morning?
Well, reference to Vance.
Yes.
I think what he said, we can all agree what he said was true.
Yeah.
Possibly more importantly is the fact that it was said by him. And you're going to be seeing a lot more of Vance, I think, because Trump can't do another 4 years.
Yeah.
So you're going to be looking at, unless something goes terribly wrong, you're going to be looking at President Vance in about 4 years. So, and they're going to have to expose him over the next 4 years a lot more than they would do normally for a vice president.
It's I mean, just in terms of what he said, he was actually there to talk about Trump and Putin having the phone call, what the end of that war looks like, how they see it's going to be reconciled. And of course, he didn't do that. He turned on the EU and the UK. And the interesting thing for me about this is that Starmer also now has to decide which side he's on. Is he going to put his allegiances with the EU or with the US? He has completely contradicted J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance saying, actually, there's no way Ukraine can join NATO. Starmer is saying that the pathway to NATO membership is a given. It can't be both.
No, it's true, but I think the divergence is the fact that we're no longer looking at, even on local levels, we're no longer looking at left and right so much as more an old way of life and common sense and globalist woke project. And Starmer is well and truly in the globalist camp.
Yeah.
Trump, the non-politician, the disruptor, and it's used in a pejorative term because the idiocy has overtaken the common sense. So to talk common sense now, you're a disruptor.
Yeah.
And I think Vance has. Everybody's talking about J.D. Vance, and they're projecting him through the next 4 years to be the next president. And Starmer, as usual, will of course follow the international route.
Yeah. Well said.
Could I just say on the economy, 0.1% is well within the margins of error.
100% it is.
I wouldn't surprise me if, in fact, the reality was 0.1% shrinkage.
Well, I would agree. I don't think it's good news at all in any way, however you splice that. Dave, thanks ever so much. Craig, you've got 1 minute. Craig in York, good morning.
Hi, morning. It's just, I'll keep it brief, but I mean, we are made to feel like criminals here. I brought my wife across from South Africa, spousal visa. She's got 4 kids. She's got a master's degree. She's a social worker. We're not allowed to do anything, and we pay £2,500 per person every 2.5 years. That includes NHS fees.
Yeah.
I cannot get them on a dentist. And then you've got a Zimbabwean that is a paedophile, and he's allowed to stay here.
I don't understand it.
You know, we're doing everything by the book.
Yeah.
And I'm British. And the other thing is, I've adopted my children, and the courts here don't see it as legal. And this was all done. I mean, I met her in South Africa, and we got married there. I lived in South Africa for a while. Not allowed to do it. We are treated as second-class citizens, and we're paying taxes here.
It's deeply iniquitous, Craig. Thank you very much for your call. Peter Card, welcome.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good.
I'm all right, thank you. This is pretty shocking stuff from JD Vance. It is amazing, actually.
Oh,
and he's right.
It dominated the drive show yesterday.
Did it?
Was just so. There's so many people who have an opinion on it. We also had a pretty shocking interview with